Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Paula Salazar. Paula Salazar was born on September 6, 2015, in Venezuela to parents Andrina Bermúdez Millán and Leonardo Salazar. Her mother was from Machorena, Minagas, while her father was from Tucupito, a town in the state of Delta Amacuro. A year later, in September 2016, the family decided to move to Ecuador in search of a better life. However, their new life in Quito, the capital of Ecuador, was short-lived. Just a month after their arrival, the relationship between Andrina and Leonardo began to deteriorate due to various reasons. They eventually broke up, and Andrina decided to move to Cuenca, Ecuador's third-largest city, with Paula. A mother's friend kindly offered them temporary accommodation while they settled and found work. Meanwhile, Leonardo returned to his hometown of Tucupito in Venezuela. After spending some time, Leonardo decided to move to Trinidad and Tobago. At that point, Leonardo had already been dealing with a long-standing disability resulting from a serious motorcycle accident that occurred during his youth, which had left his left arm completely unusable. Leonardo struggled to find decent work due to his physical limitations. After Andrina moved to Cuenca, she almost completely stopped communicating with Leonardo, only informing him once that she had taken a job on a farm in Tapacundo. Some months later, Andrina formed a romantic bond with Washington Andreas Aymaro. Interestingly, Andreas happened to own the same farm in Tapacundo where Andrina was employed. When Paula was around 18 months old, Andrina moved in with Andreas, bringing Paula with her. Later, on April 7, 2019, Andreas and Andrina had a child of their own. The arrival of the new baby brought immense joy and unity to the family. Life was going smoothly for the family, with the farm thriving and everyone enjoying each day. However, their happiness was short-lived. On March 27, 2020, a life-altering event occurred, changing the course of their lives forever. On that fateful day, Andreas took Paula to the flower plantations. During the car ride, Paula suddenly became ill, feeling dizzy and nauseous. Andreas was forced to stop at a public restroom, where Paula vomited again. He decided to leave her alone for a few minutes to retrieve a change of clothes from the car, as Paula's clothes were soiled. When Andreas returned, he found Paula lying with her head in the toilet bowl. He pulled her out and attempted to administer first aid before rushing her to the hospital. However, by the time they arrived, Paula had already passed away. The doctors who examined her body noticed that Andreas' story didn't add up. They found bruises on Paula's body and face that couldn't have been caused by the events Andreas described. As a result, the doctors contacted the police, who arrived soon after and arrested Andreas as a suspect in Paula's murder. The autopsy later revealed that Paula's death was not an accident, contradicting Andreas' claim that she had drowned in the toilet bowl. The autopsy results revealed that she had been dead for approximately 24 hours before arriving at the hospital, contradicting the foster father's claim that he had administered first aid and CPR just 20 minutes prior to hospitalization. The autopsy also showed that she had suffered severe injuries, including broken ribs, multiple microtraumas, a cracked spine, and sepsis, which ultimately led to her death. Paula's death was initially reported as an accident, but an examination of her body revealed numerous injuries, both old and new. Leonardo Salazar, Paula's father, did not learn of her death until 33 days after it occurred. After Leonardo left Ecuador, Andrina began a new relationship and severed all ties with him. As a result, Leonardo was unaware of Paula's tragic fate for 3 days. During this time, he could only keep up with Paula through photos sent to him by Andrina and their mutual friends. Leonardo learned of his daughter's death. But Andrina's family told him a different story, claiming Paula had died from -19 complications. During this time, Ecuador was under quarantine due to the pandemic, like the rest of the world. But unusually, there were very few -19 deaths in the country. Leonardo was naturally skeptical about his daughter's alleged cause of death and quickly began researching Ecuador's -19 mortality statistics, which were publicly available on social media. Leonardo reached out to Andrina every day for 10 days, but she didn't return his calls until he'd been trying to contact her for almost 2 weeks. When they finally spoke, Andrina told him that Paula had died from -19, but she claimed her lawyers wouldn't allow her to share more information. On the same day she contacted Leonardo, she visited the morgue to begin making arrangements for her daughter's funeral. Despite a prosecutor requesting more time to examine the body, the funeral proceeded on April 10, 2020. Andrina refused to allow a second autopsy to be performed. Through social media and friends, Andrina's friends contacted Leonardo, sharing information about Paula's difficult life in the years before her death. They provided Leonardo with the details they had gathered, which included recordings of conversations, photos, audio recordings, and other similar evidence. According to witnesses, Paula faced mistreatment not only from her stepfather but also from her own mother. Observers reported that Paula was only seen happy when she played alone around Andreas, suggesting that her distress occurred during interactions involving multiple individuals, especially when Andreas was near Andrina. Typically, Paula appeared depressed, acted shyly, and became easily startled. She eventually confided in acquaintances that her mother and stepfather physically punished her for misbehaving. She further revealed that Andreas once pushed her as punishment, causing her to hit her head against the wall. She expressed her deep-seated fear of Andreas by calling him a monster. Paula was plagued by nightmares and struggled with insomnia. When she moved into her Andrina's home, her parents initially required her to sleep alone, ignoring her cries when she had trouble falling asleep. They also refused to help her get tucked into bed, leaving her to do it on her own. Furthermore, her mother, Andrina, had begun teaching her how to cook at an unreasonably young age. Paula was forced to prepare her own breakfast and dinner, as her mother preferred to sleep in late and take breaks from childcare in the evenings. Andrina seemed unconcerned about the dangers of having a preschool-aged child cook for herself, despite the risks involved. This neglect was part of a larger pattern of indifference towards Paula's well-being, as Andrina simply did not want to care for her daughter. A young girl repeatedly complained of pain in her legs and back to her teacher, claiming she couldn't walk. Due to her persistent complaints and visible bruises, the teacher took her to the school's health center. After an examination, doctors suspected she was being mistreated at home. The teacher contacted a special police unit to investigate her family for potential abuse. Authorities took up the case and temporarily relocated she to a safe location while the investigation was ongoing. On October 16, 2019, she, Paula, was temporarily placed with her uncle, Andrina's brother. A court hearing was scheduled for December 4, 2019, but the teachers who were set to testify failed to appear. As a result, the hearing was rescheduled for February 27, 2020. Unfortunately, the teachers didn't show up again, and the court was forced to drop the charges against Paula's parents. With no evidence, Paula was returned to her mother. Tragically, 1 month later, on March 27, she passed away. Following Paula's death, Andreas was initially placed in protective custody during the investigation. However, he later appealed this decision, leading to a court hearing on June 12, 2020. During the video conference hearing, the judge set a restraining order and decided that Andreas could be released to house arrest. Yet, in a surprise move, Andreas dropped his appeal. Meanwhile, Leonardo was running a social media campaign and sought financial support to travel from Trinidad and Tobago to Ecuador, with the goal of filing a complaint against Andrina, Paula's mother, before it was too late. At the time, Andrina had not been charged and was free. Leonardo was fortunate to receive financial assistance and free legal advice from two kind-hearted Ecuadorian lawyers, Oswaldo and Alejandro. To reach Ecuador, he had to take a perilous journey from Trinidad to Venezuela, crossing the border by raft and then continuing on to San Cristobal. Leonardo started his journey into Caira and entered Colombia, then traveled through rugged terrain to reach Ipiales. From there, he made his way to the Rumichaca Bridge, which marks the border with Ecuador, and eventually arrived in Quito, where he met with a lawyer on June 30th. Meanwhile, a formal complaint had been filed by Leonardo against Anrina, and as a result, Anrina was charged on July 6, 2020, and was subsequently put under house arrest. Anrina and Andreas were charged with murder, an offense that carries a maximum prison sentence of 13 years. In November 2020, Leonardo's lawyer raised concerns about the possibility of Anrina fleeing the country due to a past incident where she attempted self-harm. As a precaution, the judge ruled in favor of fitting Anrina with an electronic monitoring device, reducing the need for her to attend court hearings twice a week, making them only once a week instead. Anrina later asked the judge to reconsider the decision to wear an electronic monitoring device. A second hearing was held on November 16 to consider this request. Despite these delays, the judge eventually scheduled a trial for December. Due to the pandemic dominating the news, some key events were not reported. The trial began on January 14, 2021, with Andreas being held at the Regional Detention Center. The trial was closed to the public and no media representatives were present. Some participants joined via video link. The autopsy report revealed that Paula had suffered severe and brutal injuries, including damaged spinal discs, broken ribs, and previous fractures that had healed. However, the infection that caused her death was a result of injuries she sustained later on. The report also confirmed that Paula had been dead for approximately 24 hours by the time Andreas took her to the hospital. The extent of her injuries indicated extreme cruelty and brutality. Additionally, the autopsy showed that Paula was severely malnourished, underweight, and deficient in essential minerals and nutrients, with her physical condition being significantly worse than expected for her age. Paula's mother, Andrina, dismissed the severity of Paula's injuries and instead implied that Paula's issues were psychological and that she hurt herself intentionally to seek attention. Andrina attributed the change in Paula's behavior to her feeling neglected after her brother was born. Just a few months after Leonardo left Ecuador in 2017, she began to experience abuse. It is likely that the abuse started immediately after her mother, Andrina, started a relationship with Andreas. Over 40 witnesses testified against Andrina and Andreas, confirming that Paula suffered abuse for at least 3 years. At the final hearing before the verdict, Andrina took sole responsibility for the abuse, claiming she was the one who hit Paula with a belt in her fists. She claimed Andreas was innocent and had never mistreated Paula. Andrina also stated that she punished Paula for causing problems in her relationship with Andreas. The judges were concerned about Andrina and Andreas' newborn son, but it was clear that the child had not been abused like Paula. Andreas has chosen to remain silent about the incident since his arrest on February 3, 2021. The trial for Paula's murder was concluded, and both defendants were found guilty. The maximum sentence for this crime is 13 years, but the chief judge considered an aggravating factor. Paula was only 4 years old and unable to defend herself. As a result, the judge sentenced they to 17 years and 4. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Plass. Amanda Lynn Pla was born on December 11, 1990, in Chappie, Massachusetts. She grew up there with her siblings, Emily and Nicholas. According to her mother, Michelle Myas, Amanda was a free spirit, often jokingly told that she was born in the wrong generation. In 2011, Amanda worked as a waitress at Friendly's in Chappie. At the time, she was dating 27-year-old Seth Green, a carpenter. On August 26, 2011, Seth called 911, frantic and crying, reporting that he had found Amanda unresponsive on the kitchen floor of her third-floor apartment. He described her as already unconscious, with multiple wounds visible on her body. Seth was in shock, asking the operator to send both the police and an ambulance. When paramedics responded to the emergency call, they found Amanda deceased from multiple stab wounds, including injuries to her chest, throat, and abdomen. The police promptly secured the crime scene, cordoning off the house where the incident occurred. Upon their arrival, officers encountered Seth on the porch, visibly distraught and in a state of shock. A thorough search of Amanda's apartment was conducted by detectives who sought to gather evidence from the crime scene. Although the perpetrator had fled the scene, they left behind crucial clues. Initial observations revealed a substantial amount of blood splatter in the kitchen, leading detectives to conclude that the attack had taken place there, and that the likely weapon was a knife, which the perpetrator had taken with them. Furthermore, police discovered visible shoe impressions from Nike sneakers on the floor, and broken glass in the room, where a palm print was also found. The brutal crime's motive remained a mystery, but detectives suspected Amanda knew her attacker and that personal animosity drove the crime, given the nature and number of wounds on her body. Consequently, the primary suspect was Amanda's boyfriend, Seth Green, who was taken to the police station for questioning. Amanda's death was a devastating shock to her family, with her mother, Michelle Mathis, struggling to come to terms with the severity of the situation. Sadly, Amanda's death was not the only heartache her family would have to endure, a topic that will be explored further in due course. As I mentioned earlier, the police took Seth Green in for questioning, which wasn't surprising given the circumstances. He was the obvious first suspect, being Amanda's boyfriend, with blood stains on his clothes, and the one who had dialed 911. It transpired that he and Amanda had started dating less than 2 weeks prior to her death, and her family knew very little about him. Although he was 7 years older and might have had differing views on certain matters, it was unclear whether this could have led to an argument that escalated into a brutal crime. The investigators naturally considered the possibility that Seth might have committed the crime, claiming Amanda was already dead when he arrived at her apartment. They established that a 2-hour window existed between Seth's 911 call and Amanda's death. This time frame would have allowed him sufficient opportunity to destroy evidence and dispose of the murder weapon. Consequently, the detective's primary question was whether Seth Green was responsible for Amanda's death. Seth appeared at the police station, visibly shaken and distraught, overcome with grief over the loss of his girlfriend. His tears flowed freely, prompting the investigators to wonder whether his emotional display was genuine or an attempt to divert suspicion from himself. During the interrogation, Seth explained that he had been at work all day and had planned to drive Amanda to the restaurant where she was employed, but his own work commitments had prevented him from doing so. Although their relationship was relatively new, Seth claimed that he had strong feelings for Amanda and had no motive to harm her. Seth was a carpenter at a construction site. The investigators questioned him about the tools he used for work, implying that he might have used one of them to commit a crime. As a carpenter, Seth wore a tool belt on the job, which held various carpentry tools, including a knife. However, he claimed that he always left the tool belt at the construction site after his shift, and this particular day was no different. After finishing his work, Seth changed out of his work clothes, left his tools behind, and went to meet Amanda. Seth was the prime suspect in his girlfriend's death, but he maintained his innocence. Ultimately, the police verified his alibi. He even passed a polygraph test. The construction boots he wore when they arrived didn't match the Nike sneaker prints found at the crime scene. Furthermore, his shoe size was significantly larger than the prints, and the palm print on the glass didn't belong to him either. Considering all the evidence, the police cleared Seth's name. Amanda had put up a fierce fight, so the attacker must have had scratches. In the weeks following the crime, the police found skin particles under Amanda's nails, which they thought would lead to a breakthrough. Unfortunately, after testing the DNA sample, they couldn't find a match in any of their databases. The motive behind the crime remains unclear. Although there were valuable items in Amanda's room that could have been targeted in a robbery, they were left untouched. Moreover, the police did not find any signs of forced entry. There are two possible explanations for how the perpetrator gained access. Either Amanda knew the person and let them in voluntarily, or she might have accidentally left the door unlocked. Amanda's colleagues and friends were interviewed by investigators, who discovered that the crime might have stemmed from a love triangle. Prior to Amanda dating Seth, she was in a relationship with another man, but their breakup was acrimonious. According to those familiar with the situation, Amanda initiated the breakup, and her ex-boyfriend was reportedly unhappy about it. Unrequited love often drives people to make rash decisions that have devastating consequences. As a result, the investigators looked into this lead, but ultimately found nothing. Amanda's ex-boyfriend provided his DNA and fingerprints, neither of which matched the samples found under Amanda's fingernails or on the broken window glass in her room. Moreover, he had a solid alibi. The police explored various leads, but none led to a breakthrough in solving Amanda's murder. As a result, the investigation stalled. Determined to seek justice, Amanda's family took matters into their own hands. They distributed flyers and sponsored car races, hoping someone would come forward with crucial information. Michelle, Amanda's mother, acknowledged that her daughter was not faultless, but she couldn't fathom why someone would take her life and why no one was willing to cooperate with the police. However, Amanda's family soon faced another distressing challenge. They discovered that several police officers had taken photos of Amanda's body with their personal phones and shared them with others, including civilians. According to the police internal affairs report, Sergeant Keith Lame, a senior officer responsible for securing the 73 School Street apartment where Amanda was fatally stabbed on August 26, 2011, was among those who took the photos. He emailed the image from his cell phone to another police sergeant, who then passed it to a patrolman. The officer subsequently shared the photo with civilians, including coaches at a youth football game. Records reveal that Lame captured a photo using his cell phone. He subsequently sent it to Sergeant Jeffrey Godare, who then forwarded the image via email to Patrolman Chad Levesque. For unknown reasons, Officer Levesque chose to share the disturbing photo of homicide victim Amanda, lying on her kitchen floor with other football coaches. Captain William Jebb, the internal affairs officer, reported that the photos were shown to at least 3 coaches at a youth football game in Agawam the day after the homicide. Around the same time, Patrolman Terry Deck, responsible for logging all apartment activity for state police, took a photo of Amanda's body and sent it to 6 Chicopee police officers via individual emails. The investigation found that all 6 officers deleted the emails without reporting them, and no disciplinary action was taken against them. Their names were not mentioned in the records. The rest of the officers involved faced consequences for incompetence and failing to meet work standards. Deck and Lame, who took the photos, received formal reprimands, while Godare and Levesque were punished with 3 unpaid shifts. Following Amanda's stepfather's call to the police on September 28, 2011, an internal investigation was launched. His friend had claimed to have seen photos of the crime scene, which had taken place a month earlier. Despite their best efforts, it wasn't until about 2 years later that a breakthrough was finally made in the case. The investigators re-examined all the evidence to determine if they had overlooked any crucial details. In Amanda's bedroom, a previously unseen clue caught their attention on a dry erase board. The handwritten message read, "Dennis was here, 8/11, which became significant since it was dated only 15 days prior to Amanda's body being discovered in her apartment. What was striking was that this critical piece of evidence had been in plain sight the entire time, yet nobody had noticed it until now. It wasn't until investigators started asking around that they realized they didn't know who Dennis was. The name didn't come up at all during the entire investigation. So detectives decided to dig deeper, scouring Amanda's phone records and social media posts to see if she had any connections to someone by that name. They also interviewed her friends, family, and coworkers, and that's when Amanda's ex-boyfriend shared some interesting information. He told them that Amanda's apartment had been broken into several times when she wasn't home, and that she suspected a young Puerto Rican man whose name started with the letter D. Amanda had tried to handle the situation calmly, as she knew the guy, and had even met with him to talk about the break-ins. However, when she brought it up, he denied any involvement. Amanda then revealed that a neighbor had seen him in her apartment and politely asked him to return her stolen belongings. But the guy got defensive and stormed out. Now, one of the most crucial tasks for the investigators was to find out who Dennis was and whether he was the one who took Amanda's life. They discovered that at the time of the crime, a man named Dennis Rosa Roman lived just 3 blocks from the house where Amanda died. A background search on Rosa Roman revealed a history of breaking and entering. However, there was no palm print to compare to the one they found at Amanda's home. The police located Dennis in Westfield, Massachusetts, and requested that he come to the station for an informal talk, but he refused. When they spoke with him, he appeared extremely nervous and agitated. However, in November 2013, 22-year-old Rosa Roman unexpectedly showed up at the police station. The police inquired about Dennis's relationship with Amanda, and although Dennis acknowledged knowing Amanda from their hometown, he claimed he hadn't seen her in a couple of years. His response was plausible, given that Amanda had died 2 years prior. Next, investigators asked if he had ever visited Amanda's apartment, and Dennis replied that he had never been there, saying he didn't know her well at all. He revealed that he occasionally sold Amanda marijuana, explaining that these were the rare instances when their paths crossed. During the interrogation, Rosa Roman consented to provide a DNA sample from his mouth and disclose his shoe size, which matched the shoes found at the crime scene. The officers observed that Rosa Roman was wearing Nike Air Max shoes, the same brand as the footwear documented in the bloody tracks at the crime scene, but with a different tread pattern. After providing his DNA, Rosa Roman declined to answer further questions from the investigators, promising to return to the police station in a few days to continue the conversation. At that point, the police had no grounds to detain him, so he was released. There were concerns that he might flee, which could have stalled the investigation. Amanda's phone records revealed that she had 9 conversations with Dennis on July 28, 2011. The records indicated that Amanda initiated 4 of these calls, while Dennis made 5 calls to her. Later, Rosa Roman returned to the police station, having kept his promise. However, he altered his approach, claiming that he occasionally communicated with Amanda. He alleged that Amanda had confided in him about someone breaking into her apartment on multiple occasions when she was not present. According to Rosa, Amanda didn't report these incidents to the police because the perpetrator didn't steal anything of value. At this stage, the investigators had heard the break-in story multiple times and were almost convinced that Rosa Roman was responsible, entering Amanda's apartment when she was away. They were increasingly suspicious that the man was concealing information, and they couldn't find an alternative explanation for his altered testimony. The only remaining questions were what he was hiding and how he was connected to Amanda's death. When investigators presented Rosa Roman with the photo of the dry erase board featuring the message, "Dennis was here on 8/11/11, he suddenly recalled writing it, contradicting his earlier claim that he had never entered Amanda's apartment. The DNA test results proved he had provided false testimony, as his DNA matched the samples found under Amanda's fingernails, and the palm print on the glass was also identified as his. This conclusive evidence established a direct link between Rosa Roman and the crime. After realizing the police had gathered enough evidence for his arrest, Rosa Roman altered his testimony for the third time. He now asserted he was present at the crime scene and attempted to rescue Amanda from her attacker, suggesting someone else was involved. When investigators pressed him to identify the perpetrator, Rosa Roman declined, supposedly fearing for his family's safety and his own. Nevertheless, he provided specific details about the individual who allegedly took Amanda's life. The suspect, according to Rosa Roman, was tall, white, light-skinned, blue-eyed, and weighed between 170 and 200 pounds. He wore old pants, dirty boots, and a t-shirt with the phrase, "Why drink and drive when you can smoke and fly," emblazoned on it. Despite Dennis's testimony, detectives remained skeptical, as all the evidence suggested that only one person was present when Amanda was stabbed. Rosa Roman was subsequently arrested and charged with Amanda's murder. The trial commenced nearly 3 years later, in 2016. Rosa Roman's attorneys presented a defense that their client was indeed present at the crime scene, but they maintained he was not the perpetrator of Amanda's murder. Moreover, they alleged that the police conducted a flawed investigation, suggesting that they wrongly accused Dennis of the crime after an unsuccessful inquiry. The defense team pointed out that despite having all the necessary information, it took the police 2 years to confront Dennis. Rosa Roman stated that on the day Amanda died, he was forced by his drug dealer to accompany the dealer to Amanda's apartment, supposedly because Amanda owed the dealer around $500 or $600. The dealer demanded his money, so he took Rosa Roman to Amanda's apartment, where the situation escalated out of control. The dealer pulled out a knife and began stabbing Amanda. Rosa Roman claimed he wanted to intervene and help Amanda, but was unable to stop the dealer. At one point, Amanda grabbed his hand, which is why his DNA was left under her nails. However, the prosecutors had a different account of events. They thought Rosa Roman had broken into Amanda's apartment when she was away during one of his illegal intrusions. On one of these occasions, he left a message with his name on the board, which Amanda correctly suspected was written by the trespassing Rosa Roman. This led her to call him, demanding he return what he had stolen, resulting in 9 phone calls between Amanda and Rosa Roman. On the day of Amanda's death, Rosa Roman broke into her apartment again, thinking she would be at work, but Amanda was home, and a violent argument ensued, ending with Rosa Roman taking Amanda's life. After 8 days of testimony and 5 hours of deliberation, a 12-person jury found Rosa Roman guilty of causing Amanda's death in July 2016. The court then sentenced Roman to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The internal audit of the police officers was delayed for many years. Finally, in 2018, Jeffrey Gadir was fired from the police force, but he appealed and was allowed to return to service in 2020. The commission ruled that he would be demoted to patrolman because of his misconduct and prior disciplinary record. On August 4, 2022, Massachusetts passed Amanda's Law, making it illegal for first responders to take unauthorized photographs of crime scenes. Violating this law is a misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in jail and/or a $2,000 fine. Prior to the law's passage, Amanda's family had sued the city of Chelmsford, eventually agreeing to a Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Rebecca Payne. In Massachusetts on May 20, 2008, at 6:30 a.m., the Boston police received a panicked call from the manager of the Parker Hill Apartments complex. The manager was extremely distraught, reporting that he had found a door ajar on the 3rd floor, belonging to 22-year-old student Rebecca Payne. When he knocked on the door and called out her name, he received no response. This prompted him to enter the apartment, where he was met with a disturbing sight: dark red spots and streaks on the floor, leading him to one of the rooms. Inside, he found Rebecca's lifeless body, with her belongings scattered everywhere. The state of the room strongly suggested that her killer had been searching for something in her apartment. Rebecca Charlotte Payne was born on April 19, 1986, in New Milford, Connecticut, to Virginia and Nicholas Payne. She attended New Milford High School, where she excelled in sports, particularly field hockey, track, and tennis, before graduating in 2004. Rebecca then pursued a 5-year program in athletic training at Northeastern University in Boston, focusing on the care and prevention of athletic injuries. During her 4th year, she served on the Dean's Council and as president of the Athletic Training Club, playing a key role in organizing the university's Vision for the Future Athletic Training Leadership Forum. Additionally, she was involved with the Episcopal Lutheran Center. Known for her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, Rebecca had a large circle of friends and was always willing to lend a helping hand to those in need. When Rebecca was found dead in May 2008, her friends were shocked and couldn't comprehend who could have committed such a heinous act. The police investigation began when they arrived at the crime scene, and they quickly noticed that the front door showed no signs of forced entry. This led them to suspect that Rebecca might have known her killer, possibly even letting them into her apartment voluntarily. The apartment, situated on the 3rd floor, consisted of 2 bedrooms. In one of the bedrooms, Rebecca's lifeless body was found lying face down on the floor. The trail of blood from the living room to the bedroom where Rebecca lay suggested that the attack had begun in the living room. Further evidence, including casings found at the scene, supported this theory. Forensic examination revealed that Rebecca had been shot 5 times. The bloodstains in the apartment indicated that, although severely injured, Rebecca was conscious for a while and managed to crawl to the bedroom. However, she ultimately succumbed to her injuries there, exhausted and drained of her strength. The detectives sought to identify who could have perpetrated such cruelty against her. The police quickly dismissed the possibility that the incident was a botched theft, given that her valuables remained untouched. Although the apartment was in disarray, detectives believed the perpetrator intentionally created the mess to mislead them. However, it was also plausible that the disarray resulted from Rebecca's attempts to resist and fight for her life. When the investigators examined the apartment, they found that the balcony door was open, just like the front door. The 2nd bedroom showed signs that someone had been living there too. The identity of this person needed to be determined, as they could be the one who took Rebecca's life. Alternatively, if they weren't involved, they had to be ruled out as a suspect. After speaking with the manager, the detectives discovered that Rebecca didn't live alone. She shared an apartment with a fellow student. The police immediately began searching for this roommate. Meanwhile, they interviewed all residents of Parker Hill Apartments. The brutal murder of Rebecca, who had been shot 5 times, would have certainly generated significant noise. It was astonishing to the officers that multiple residents of the apartment complex reported hearing a woman's screams and gunfire between 3 and 4 a.m. Yet sadly, no one took the initiative to contact the police. It seemed that each individual assumed someone else would take responsibility and make the call. In psychology, the phenomenon where individuals are less likely to assist someone in distress when others are present is known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome. This social psychological theory suggests that the presence of other people can inhibit an individual's willingness to help a victim. The term Genovese syndrome originates from a tragic incident that occurred on March 13, 1964, when 28-year-old Kitty Genovese was brutally murdered outside her apartment building in Kew Gardens, Queens, New York City. Although it was initially reported that 38 witnesses witnessed or heard the attack without calling the police or providing assistance, this portrayal has since been disputed as inaccurate. The case of Rebecca Payne led to an investigation into the social psychological phenomenon known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome. What's truly shocking is that, unlike in the widely reported Kitty Genovese incident, Rebecca's neighbors actually did hear her screams and the sound of gunshots, yet still failed to call 911. This tragic event was a devastating loss for Rebecca's parents. They described their daughter as a driven and compassionate young woman who was loved by her friends. Rebecca was the kind of person who always put others first, giving selflessly from the heart. During the investigation, police interviewed a resident who lived on the first floor of the apartment complex where the crime took place. He reported seeing a black SUV approach the building at night, but due to the darkness, he was unable to make out the license plate or identify anyone getting out of the vehicle. The apartment building was equipped with surveillance cameras both inside and outside, which investigators hoped would provide crucial evidence. However, it emerged that the CCTV footage could only be viewed in real time, and recording it required inserting a video cassette into a VCR and pressing the record button, a step that unfortunately wasn't taken. Considering this information and the fact that the residential complex's manager discovered Rebecca's body, investigators began to suspect him of committing the crime. As a resident of the building, he had unrestricted access to Rebecca's apartment at all times. Furthermore, he was aware that no one monitored the surveillance cameras, which might have led him to wait until late at night to attack Rebecca for unknown reasons. The police sought to explore all possible scenarios. The police investigation into the manager gathered pace when they conducted a background check on him, which revealed a history of legal issues related to illegal substances. Furthermore, a thorough search of his apartment by the police turned up additional evidence. An officer noticed several dark red stains on the front door. The stains were swabbed by forensic experts and sent for further analysis. The apartment complex manager was taken in for police questioning. Investigators grilled him with questions, trying to determine if he was concealing information or would alter his story. However, he denied any involvement in Rebecca Payne's death, stating that he was in his apartment the entire night with his wife. The investigators then spoke with his wife, who corroborated her husband's alibi, confirming that he had indeed spent the entire night with her. The police released the suspect after a laboratory report confirmed the dark red stains on his apartment door were just paint, eliminating grounds for his arrest. During their investigation, detectives reviewed video and photo evidence from the scene, which led them to focus on a public transportation card. This card, used in the Boston area, stores data on each use, including the exact location and time. The transit police provided detectives with CCTV footage, which showed Rebecca using the card on her way home, appearing calm and alone, with no one following her. Unfortunately, this footage did not help identify any potential suspects. A few days later, investigators obtained another surveillance video from a camera outside the hospital building near the Parker Hill Apartments. The recording showed a black SUV passing by around the same time as the attack on Rebecca. The vehicle matched the witness's description, but the poor quality of the footage made it impossible to read the license plates. However, investigators were able to conclude that the car was a Ford. After identifying Rebecca's roommate, the detectives brought her in for questioning to determine if she had any connection to the incident. They wanted to know if she had any information about the events surrounding Rebecca's death. The roommate claimed to be shocked by the news and explained that she had moved back in with her parents to study for an exam. When her parents corroborated her alibi, she was cleared as a suspect. Although the conversation didn't reveal any direct evidence, the roommate did provide a useful lead. She mentioned that Rebecca's boyfriend, Matt, also a fellow student, had access to their apartment. Matt's motive for taking Rebecca's life was a crucial question investigators had to answer. They reached out to Matt by phone and learned he had moved to New York State to live with his parents around the time Rebecca was attacked. Matt claimed to be depressed over his girlfriend's death, but his distress might have been an act. Matt said he was staying with his parents, and they corroborated his alibi when shown a printout of his cell phone's call history. investigators discovered Matt had spoken to Rebecca around midnight, mere hours before her death. However, the cell tower that received the signal from Matt's phone was located near his parents' house in New York State. Through an experiment, investigators determined that Matt wouldn't have had enough time to drive from his parents' house to Boston in 3 or 4 hours to commit the crime. As a result, Matt was also cleared from the list of suspects. Family and friends were gathered at Rebecca's home in Connecticut, bidding her a final farewell. But the police investigation had stalled due to a lack of evidence, new witnesses, and DNA samples. The case had reached a dead end. Nicholas Payne expressed the sentiments of those who loved her. "We're left to mourn the loss of Rebecca, knowing we'll never again hear her laughter or share in her life's adventures and progress. All of that has been taken from us." As the years went by, Rebecca's parents continued to wait in vain for answers about their daughter's death, which remained a mystery. However, a surprising breakthrough occurred in 2012. Anthony White, a man, was arrested by the Boston police for dealing illegal substances. With the threat of a lengthy prison sentence looming, White proposed a deal to the investigators. In exchange for a shorter sentence, he would provide information about the night Rebecca Payne died. Recognizing this as a potential opportunity to finally crack the long-dormant case, the investigators accepted White's offer. After consulting with the prosecutor, White reported that on May 20th, 2008, he received a contact from an acquaintance, Cornell Smith, who was also involved in illegal drug dealing. Smith requested a meeting with White and arrived accompanied by their mutual friend, Michael Balba, who drove a black SUV. The three of them proceeded to the Parker Hill Apartments, where Balba parked his vehicle to observe the activities taking place inside. According to White, Cornell Smith spotted Rebecca in a third-floor window and exclaimed, "That's her." They waited until the lights in Rebecca's apartment went dark. Then Smith climbed from the first-floor balcony to the second and finally the third floor. Since the balcony door was open, he entered the apartment. However, Rebecca wasn't asleep. Instead, she was lying on the living room couch. When she saw the intruder, she began screaming, and a brief struggle followed. Smith then fired 5 shots at her and exited through the front door, after which they drove away. The investigators were skeptical of White's testimony, believing he had made up the story to get a shorter prison sentence. They couldn't figure out why Cornell Smith would want to kill Rebecca, who was not involved in his world in any way. What White said next shocked and disturbed the officers greatly. According to him, Rebecca's death was a tragic case of mistaken identity. 2 sisters, who closely resembled each other, lived on the first floor of the Parker Hill Apartments, and one of them bore a striking similarity to Rebecca. These sisters were not only rivals of Smith's, but also involved in the illegal drug trade. Smith believed he had been wrongly arrested due to their illicit activities and sought revenge. Although he knew they resided in the Parker Hill Apartments, he was unaware of their specific floor or apartment number. When he spotted Rebecca in the window, he mistakenly identified her as one of the sisters he sought to harm. Investigators determined that Cornell Smith had been arrested in February 2008 for illegally selling drugs, but he was freed on bail just before Rebecca's death occurred. He subsequently sought revenge against the sisters, whom he mistakenly blamed for his arrest. By 2012, Anthony White had shared his information with investigators, but Cornell Smith was already serving a 12-year sentence for selling illegal drugs, a conviction he received 2 years prior. Following White's testimony, Smith was subsequently charged with Rebecca's murder, despite his denial of any involvement. However, before Smith's court appearance, the prosecution team received a severe blow. Their key witness, Anthony White, had died in prison. This was a significant setback because, aside from White's testimony, there was no physical evidence directly linking Smith to Rebecca Payne's apartment. Hoping to finally bring Cornell Smith to justice, investigators pored over his court file on drug trafficking and were shocked to discover incriminating letters he had written to the presiding judge. In these letters, Cornell Smith came across as arrogant, looking down on others. Although some of the letters made no sense, one of them contained a crucial piece of evidence that would ultimately be his downfall. It's noteworthy that it's unclear why these letters went unnoticed earlier, especially since they were addressed to the judge. In one of the letters, Smith wrote in anger about an earlier altercation that had taken place downtown Boston. This letter described an event that ultimately led to the unfortunate death of Rebecca Payne at the hands of Cornell Allen Smith Sr. Notably, the letter confirmed that Smith was in her apartment at the time of her death. The trial of Cornell Smith took place in 2015. Throughout the proceedings, from the start of the trial to the sentencing, the district attorney maintained that Rebecca Payne was an innocent victim who had no involvement with Smith or Balba. Over the course of the trial, Smith went through 3 lawyers. His first lawyer, Jeffrey Karp, a seasoned defense attorney with over 20 years of experience, withdrew from the case after Smith assaulted him during a preliminary hearing at the Suffolk County Superior Court in Massachusetts. In a shocking and unprovoked attack, Smith suddenly stood up and struck Karp on the head with his handcuffed hand. According to Nicholas Payne, this incident demonstrated the kind of person Smith is. Notwithstanding the assault, Karp declined to press charges against Smith, leaving it to the judge to appoint a new attorney to represent him. Cornell Smith pleaded guilty to the involuntary deprivation of Rebecca Payne's life and was sentenced to serve between 18 and 20 years in prison. Before passing sentence, the judge instructed Smith to turn and face Rebecca's friends and family, telling him that they represented the pain caused by his actions. In memory of Rebecca, her hometown has named its local tennis courts, a garden, and a National Athletic Trainers Association scholarship fund after her. Her father, Nicholas Payne, said they wanted to ensure she would not be forgotten. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Amanda Anderson. In 2010, 19-year-old Amanda Anderson resided with her family in New Chapel Hill, Texas, a small city with a population of less than 1,000 people, approximately 100 miles from Dallas. The events that unfolded in her life shocked not only her family, but also everyone who became aware of the details of this case. The incident instilled fear in the community, causing residents who previously felt safe enough to leave their front doors unlocked at night to change their habit. Amanda Elizabeth Anderson was born on October 10, 1990, in Fridley, Minnesota, to Mark and Stacy Kennedy Anderson. She graduated with honors from Tyler Gospel Chapel School in 2009. At the time of her death, Amanda was employed by Trinity Mother Francis and was a student at Tyler Junior College, where she was majoring in English literature. With a passion for writing, music, and life, Amanda had a bright future ahead of her. Tragically, her life was cut short on September 15, 2010, leaving her family to face the devastating consequences. Amanda was found dead at the family home in New Chapel Hill. Her 15-year-old brother, Nate Anderson, made a 911 call after returning home and discovering a shock. In his conversation with the dispatcher, Nate explained that he had been doing homework but was getting stressed because he couldn't find the answers to his questions, so he decided to take a quick jog in the nearby woods, a routine he followed occasionally. When he returned, he found the garage door had been kicked open. Nate began by searching his own room, then moved on to Amanda's room. It was only afterwards that he stumbled upon his sister's lifeless body lying on the floor. A horrific discovery. When the dispatcher inquired about the front or back door being kicked in, Nate clarified that it was actually the garage door that had been forced open, likely because it was the most commonly used entrance. Nate was crying, and the dispatcher asked him to calm down, explaining that police and his parents were on their way. The dispatcher then asked if Nate had touched anything in the house, and he said no. About 2 minutes into their conversation, Nate explained to the dispatcher how he'd found Amanda, describing a bullet hole and stating his belief that there were a couple of them in her head. When the investigators arrived at the crime scene, Nate recounted the same details he had provided to the dispatcher during the 911 call. He explained that he had returned home to find his door kicked open, and to his horror, discovered his deceased sister. Overwhelmed with grief, Nate was inconsolable, crying almost continuously as he struggled to come to terms with the shocking fact that someone had shot and killed his sister. During the crime scene examination, the criminologist determined that Amanda was seated on her bed in her bedroom when she was shot, causing her to fall to the floor. The absence of a crime weapon and shell casings at the scene suggests that the perpetrator either removed the casings before fleeing or used a revolver, which would not eject casings. Amanda's parents were devastated when they learned what had happened to their daughter. As deeply religious people, they struggled to comprehend how anyone could commit such an act against someone as innocent and kind-hearted as Amanda, who had only recently graduated from high school and was still figuring out her path in life. She was a gentle soul who wished no harm to anyone and had no enemies. Nate's grandparents recalled that his world was shattered the day Amanda died. He was overcome with grief in the police car, sobbing uncontrollably, and they had to extract him and cradle him in their arms. According to them, Nate had an extraordinary love and devotion for his sister, and discovering her in such a distressed state was utterly unbearable. The investigators canvassed the neighborhood where the crime took place, speaking with residents to gather more information about Amanda and her family. Uniformly, those interviewed described the Andersons as a tight-knit and religious family. One neighbor offered his theory about what might have happened to Amanda. According to him, the area was previously quiet and crime-free, but about 2 weeks prior to Amanda's death, a house in the area was robbed. It's possible that the same person was involved in what happened to Amanda, and that they saw Nate Anderson go out for a run. The perpetrator might have then broken into the Andersons' house, and Amanda might have stumbled upon the scene, becoming a witness. This could be why the robber decided to kill her. To determine if Amanda's death was connected to an attempted robbery, the investigators required evidence. When caught by homeowners, robbers will often take drastic measures to prevent them from notifying the police. However, in this instance, nothing was stolen from the Anderson family home. Despite the opportunity, the perpetrator left Amanda's room untouched, with valuables like jewelry and a laptop remaining in place, unaffected by the intruder. Amanda's father, Mark, conducted a thorough search of the house and reported to the investigators that nothing was missing. Given this, the investigators began to question whether they were dealing with a robbery gone wrong. They found it puzzling that an intruder who broke into the house to steal valuables and encountered Amanda would feel the need to shoot her multiple times. This led them to suspect that the motive behind the crime was not robbery. Amanda's room was not the only area the forensics team scrutinized for clues. They conducted a thorough search of the entire house, gathering fingerprints and hair samples in the hopes of finding traces left by someone who didn't live there. Additionally, they collected Nate's clothing as evidence, given that he was the first to discover Amanda's body. Although an initial inspection of Nate's clothes revealed no signs of blood, consistent with his 911 call assertion that he hadn't touched anything, the police still submitted his garments to the lab for analysis, along with other evidence. This was a standard procedure to rule out family members as potential suspects. The investigators requested that Mark Anderson, Amanda's father, reveal all the weapons present in the house. As was common in Texas, the Anderson family possessed an array of guns. Although they weren't enthusiastic hunters, they occasionally practiced shooting. Following Mark Anderson's directions, the police discovered the weapons and confiscated over 10 distinct types of pistols and rifles, as well as multiple revolvers, from the residence. The police initially considered the possibility of criminal gang activity as a potential motive for the crime, but they quickly ruled it out since they had no suspects and the motive remained unclear. Additionally, their informants did not provide any useful leads. On September 17, 2010, Amanda's family struggled to come to terms with the devastating loss they had suffered. Meanwhile, investigators worked to identify those responsible for the crime. 2 days later, the police received the autopsy results, which revealed that Amanda had been shot 4 times, with all 4 wounds located in the head. What was unusual about the attack was that each shot would have been fatal, yet the perpetrator did not stop after the first shot and instead pulled the trigger 3 more times. The placement of the bullet wounds on Amanda's head was particularly noteworthy. The perpetrator used a small caliber pistol and fired multiple shots. 2 wounds were located on top of her head, another was near the right temple, and the 4th was directly on the forehead. All the wounds, except for the one on the right temple, showed a top-to-bottom trajectory. The exception, the right temple wound, had a bullet that entered at a 90-degree angle. These unusual wound patterns suggested that Amanda's death was more akin to an execution. Amanda's death was caused by .22 caliber bullets. Since there were no gunpowder marks around her head wounds, it's clear the shooter was at least a yard away. Forensic analysis led investigators to believe Amanda was familiar with her killer. They based this conclusion on 2 key facts. Firstly, Amanda was using her laptop while sitting on her bed when she was shot, implying she felt comfortable and didn't perceive a threat. Secondly, the shooter was standing right next to her. If Amanda didn't know the person, she would have likely reacted to their presence, but instead, she did nothing, suggesting she trusted the perpetrator and didn't anticipate being shot. The investigators looked beyond the Anderson family home for answers to their questions. At Amanda's college, they spoke with her friends, among whom her best friend revealed that Amanda was not the type to interact with strangers, avoided illegal activities, and therefore did not have ties to the criminal underworld. Additionally, she did not have any enemies at college. But what if someone had been secretly watching Amanda and plotting against her? The investigators collaborated with college security to uncover any suspicious incidents involving Amanda or other students over the past year. But this avenue led nowhere. A week after Amanda's death, the police were still without a motive, suspects, or answers for her family. As the family grieved, the locals of New Chapel Hill lived in fear for their lives, desperate to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. Amanda's father, Mark Anderson, expressed his despair, saying he doubted whether there would be a wedding or his wife would get to experience her pregnancy together with their daughter, and all the joys that come with it. Shortly after, a reward was offered to anyone with information that could aid the investigation, in the hope that it would encourage someone who knew something to come forward and share their knowledge with the police. Shortly after, the police station began to receive calls offering tips, but most of these were speculative and ultimately hindered the investigation rather than helping it. The process of verifying all the incoming information was time-consuming, but unfortunately, it failed to yield the desired outcome. Each and every lead ultimately ended in a dead end. The police decided to re-interview the Anderson family, focusing on Amanda's personal life, as the nature and number of wounds suggested a potentially personal motive for the crime. Amanda's mother was at a loss as to who could have committed such a heinous act, describing her daughter as a regular church attendee and an excellent student who always treated others with kindness. According to her mother, Amanda did not have a boyfriend at the time of her death, although she had briefly seen someone around a year prior. However, the relationship had fizzled out, and as far as her mother knew, they had not been in contact since. The police wanted to track down this man to determine the nature of his relationship with Amanda, the reasons behind their breakup, and whether he had any motive to harm her. According to him, he and Amanda shared some classes and occasionally went to the movies with friends, but he claimed they were never in a romantic relationship. They had gone out together on several occasions, but nothing more developed from it. When questioned about the last time he saw Amanda, He stated that he had seen her the day before her death, and she was on her way to pick up Nate from church. This was the extent of what the investigators learned, and it appeared to be another dead end. They decided to go back to the start and re-examine all the evidence, as it all began with Nate's 911 call. They focused on this call once again. In the conversation, Nate claimed he had not entered his sister's room and that someone had shot Amanda. When the dispatcher asked, "Does she have a bullet hole?" Nate responded, "There's not just one. I think there are a couple in her head." When the investigators responded to the crime scene following Nate's call, they were met with a horrific sight. Despite their experience in handling similar cases, even they were initially uncertain that Amanda had been shot multiple times. Furthermore, there was no trace of a crime weapon or shell casings at the scene, which raised a crucial question. How had Nate determined that his sister had been shot multiple times in the first place? The investigators determined that it was impossible for someone standing in the doorway to see that Amanda had been shot in the head, or to know how many times she was shot. After returning to the Anderson house, the officers inspected the door, which Nate claimed was forced open when he got home. Although they found some scratches on the door, the lock was not damaged, leading the police to conclude that someone was trying to make it seem like the door had been kicked open. The crime lab examined all the weapons found at the Anderson house and determined that one of the .22 caliber pistols was likely the one used to shoot Amanda. Although they couldn't eliminate the possibility that this pistol was the murder weapon, the investigators drew a surprising conclusion after reviewing all the available evidence. It appeared that Amanda was killed by someone within her own family. The pistol had been hidden in a secure location, indicating that the killer was familiar with its whereabouts. Furthermore, the killer had returned the weapon to its original hiding place on the night of the crime. Amanda's father was having dinner with a friend, and her mother was at work. At the time, only Amanda and her 15-year-old brother Nate were in the house. Given the circumstances, all the evidence suggested that Nate Anderson was responsible. However, the question remained, what could have driven him to take their father's gun and ultimately to take his sister's life? The investigators took a closer look at what happened that evening. Mark Anderson recalled that he phoned his daughter to remind her to pick up her mother from work. 12 minutes later, Mark received a call from Nate, who was crying and told him that someone had shot him. It transpired that, before calling 911, Nate had initially called his father to inform him and his mother of the devastating news that their son had killed their daughter. The police required concrete evidence before making any charges, as they didn't want to cause Amanda and Nate's parents further distress. The investigators decided to interview Mark Anderson without making any accusations against his son. When asked if Nate had recently used the .22 caliber pistol, Mark replied that just a few days before Amanda's death, he had handed the pistol over to Nate and that Nate had fired it in the backyard. Upon returning to the Anderson house, the officers found several .22 caliber casings in the backyard, which matched the bullets found in Amanda's body. 2 weeks after Amanda's death, a crucial discovery was made that eliminated all doubts. The clothing Nate wore on the day he found his sister's body was submitted to a laboratory for luminol testing. The test results revealed the presence of blood stains on his clothes. A leading national blood spatter expert was called in to assist the investigators in Smith County, and together they concluded that Nate Anderson was either present in the room when the shooting took place, or that he himself fired the fatal shots. The test results revealed that Nate's clothes were stained with his sister's blood. Despite being typical siblings, the police were baffled as to what could have driven Nate to shoot Amanda. The investigation aimed to uncover the reason behind this uncharacteristic act of violence. Family photos of Amanda and Nate Anderson depicted a strong bond of friendship and affection, which their parents corroborated, describing their children as a loving Christian brother and sister who always got along. On November 10, 2010, police obtained an arrest warrant for Nate Anderson, which led them to apprehend him at a church. He was accused of murdering his own sister. The news sent shockwaves through the community, with everyone familiar with the case struggling to comprehend how Nate could commit such a heinous crime. The trial commenced on October 24, 2011, marking the beginning of a long and emotionally charged journey for all involved, especially the Anderson family. Despite the evidence presented against the teenager, his family members remained steadfast in their support, adamant that he was innocent of Amanda's murder. Nate was prosecuted as an adult despite an expert's opinion that it would be in his best interest to remain in the juvenile court system. The judge overruled this opinion. During the trial, the state presented some of the evidence found in the Anderson home after Amanda's death. Prosecutors revealed that Nate's computer had a history of accessing adult websites and contained drawings with violent content. Furthermore, a text message on Amanda's phone mentioned shooting Nathan. When her friend asked why, Amanda responded that it was because Nathan would shoot large staples at her head and never assisted with household chores. An expert testified that a discovery about Nate helped establish a possible motive for the crime. However, Nate's lawyer argued that the evidence presented was not unusual. Ultimately, in February 2012, Nate Anderson accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to a first-degree crime. Prior to his plea, Nate confessed to a psychologist and his parents that he was responsible for Amanda's death. He revealed that he shot her with a pistol from their home. In a joint statement, Mark and Stacy Anderson, Nate and Amanda's parents, expressed their emotional response to the confession. Mark said, "Nate asked for my forgiveness, and I forgave him." Stacy added, "As a mother who loves both her children, this has been the most difficult experience of my life." The court has sentenced Nate Anderson to a 20-year prison term with the possibility of parole after 10 years. According to Nate's attorney, accepting the plea agreement was in his best interest. The attorney stressed that neither Nate nor his family ever wanted the case to go to trial. When asked about the motive behind the crime, Nate's attorney refused to elaborate, saying only that Nate had shown remorse and had received forgiveness. The attorney, Brett Harrison, added that there had been many difficult conversations and tears. He stated that the incident was clearly a hate crime, as there was no evidence of any other trauma. The Smith County Sheriff's Office stated that Nate was eligible to apply for parole 2 years ago, but unfortunately, they were unable to find any information regarding whether he did so. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Danielle Jennings. Danielle Jennings was born on September 16, 1978 in Columbia, South Carolina. She spent her childhood in Stockton, Georgia, with her mother and stepfather. As a cheerful and outgoing person, Danielle had to mature quickly when she became pregnant at 16. Despite her youth, she was confident in her ability to be a good mother. However, her relationship with Carl, the father of her child, didn't last, and they eventually broke up. In 1996, at the age of 17, Danielle gave birth to her son Tristan, becoming a single mother. Determined to provide the best life for herself and Tristan, Danielle met Luis, who became a father figure to her son. The two had known each other since their teenage years, initially as friends, but eventually became a couple. Danielle was overjoyed to have found happiness again, and Luis took care of both her and Tristan. They moved in together, and Danielle landed an office job at a landscaping company, which she was proud of. In December 1998, Luis popped the question, and Danielle was over the moon when she said yes. At this point, her life was going great. She had a fantastic son, a loving partner, and a career that was really taking off. But in a cruel twist of fate, everything took a devastating turn for the worse on March 15, 1999. Luis returned home from work to find Danielle unresponsive on the bed. Their son Tristan was at daycare that day. The color of Danielle's skin indicated to Luis that she had passed away, so he immediately called 911. The police arrived at the Ashley Lakes apartment complex in Norcross, Georgia, where the couple resided. Initially, the only information the authorities had was that a deceased woman was in the apartment and her fiancé had called the emergency services. This naturally raised the suspicions of the investigators, as it is not uncommon for a partner to be responsible for the death of their loved one. Luis was waiting for the police at the apartment entrance and informed them that the victim was 20-year-old Danielle Jennings. He told the police that when he returned home from work, he found Danielle lying face down on the bed, and upon turning her over, he realized she was dead and promptly called 911. The police took Luis in for questioning at the station, while the crime scene investigators carefully processed the area. Danielle was found lying on her back on the bed, fully clothed, with a ligature tightly wrapped around her neck. The ligature, which appeared to be a stocking, suggested that the perpetrator attacked her from behind. The bed was disheveled, and one of the dresser drawers was open, possibly indicating that the stocking was taken from it. The contents of Danielle's purse had been emptied and searched through, raising the possibility that the perpetrator's primary motive was theft. However, the fact that valuable items like cameras and jewelry were left untouched led the police to consider that the crime might have been committed to eliminate Danielle as a witness to a robbery. Alternatively, the crime scene could have been staged to mislead investigators, as there were no signs of forced entry on the front door or the sliding glass door to the backyard, which was locked. This lack of forced entry led investigators to suspect that Danielle might have let the perpetrator into her apartment or that they had access to keys. As a result, Luis became the prime suspect. During the questioning, Luis became very emotional. The investigators pointed out that romantic relationships can sometimes have tragic outcomes. They started by asking Luis about his movements on the day Danielle died. Luis said he was at work all day. He last saw Danielle when he left for work that morning. They both left their apartment at 6:45 a.m., but Danielle went back inside to grab something. Luis stated that Danielle was anxious about an important meeting with management that day and was worried about it, seeming a little distracted. Luis stated that Danielle phoned him around 11:30 a.m. to invite him to lunch, but he declined due to his heavy workload that prevented him from leaving his job. Later that day, Luis attempted to reach Danielle, but she was unresponsive. He then contacted her coworkers and discovered that she had gone out for lunch but failed to return. As Danielle also wasn't answering their home phone, Luis grew concerned and left work to check on her. Upon arriving at the Ashley Lakes apartments, he noticed that the front door was unlocked and slightly open, which filled him with apprehension. The police asked Luis about his relationship with Danielle, including whether they frequently argued or had family issues. Luis reported that they got along well and were deeply in love. He became distraught, arguing that the police were wasting their time by questioning him and should instead focus on finding the actual perpetrator, who was still at large. The detectives also spoke with Danielle's friends and family, all of whom were convinced that Luis was incapable of harming her. The couple had been planning their wedding and were still very much in love. Luis's coworkers confirmed that he had been at work all day, which verified his alibi and led to his removal from the list of suspects. During the interrogation, Luis stated that Danielle's coworker, Jeff, a middle-aged manager, had been paying her excessive attention, which made her uncomfortable. This was corroborated by her boss when investigators visited her workplace. According to her boss, Danielle had previously complained about Jeff's behavior, alleging that he constantly hovered around her, disrupted her work, and acted inappropriately. Despite their significant age difference, Jeff was 40 and Danielle was 20. Jeff invited Danielle to lunch, but she declined, citing her engagement to a man she loved. Jeff, however, refused to accept her rejection, suggesting that things would be different if he were 20 years younger. The company Danielle worked for took her complaints very seriously. On the day of her death, she had a meeting scheduled to discuss the complaint she had filed against Jeff, a manager at the company. Danielle was extremely anxious about this meeting, as she worried it could jeopardize her career, being a relatively new employee. Her coworkers stated that Danielle left for lunch after the meeting, but never came back, which provided investigators with a time frame for when the attack on Danielle likely occurred. The investigators' suspicions about Jeff grew when they discovered he was away from the office at the time of the crime. Furthermore, he didn't return to the office until evening. Was this merely a coincidence, or could Jeff have killed Danielle in revenge for her complaint? The investigators needed to find answers to these questions and began to focus on Jeff as a prime suspect. They explored the possibility that Jeff tailed Danielle home and attacked her when she opened the front door, which would explain the absence of forced entry. Jeff was summoned for questioning and asked to detail his relationship with Danielle. He acknowledged asking Danielle to lunch, but vigorously denied any role in her death. Although Jeff freely admitted having a liking for Danielle, he insisted he had never behaved improperly towards her and was taken aback when she lodged a complaint against him. When investigators suggested that Danielle's complaint might have motivated him to harm her, Jeff initially responded with indignation. He categorically denied being responsible for her death. Jeff claimed to have a solid alibi, stating that he spent the entire day with a colleague, driving around the city to resolve work-related issues. He provided the colleague's name, who corroborated his alibi, effectively ruling him out as a suspect. The next day, investigators reviewed the autopsy report, searching for clues to identify the killer. The report revealed that Danielle's cause of death was asphyxiation, suggesting she was caught off guard. The evidence indicated that someone had approached her from behind, pulled a stocking tight around her neck until she became unconscious, and then tied a knot to ensure she wouldn't regain consciousness. There were no signs of struggle or injury on her body, except for the ligature mark on her neck. It's possible Danielle never saw her attacker's face. Unfortunately, the crime scene yielded no useful evidence, including shoe prints, DNA, fingerprints, or hair, leaving the police with nothing to send to the laboratory for analysis. Since the police couldn't find any new leads, they went back to the original theory that the murder was a robbery gone wrong. They asked Luis to conduct a thorough search of the apartment with them once again. Luis carefully examined every room and insisted that nothing seemed to be out of place or missing. Everything was exactly where it should be. However, a few days later, Luis reached out to the police with a disturbing discovery. Danielle's wedding ring was nowhere to be found. Moreover, he pointed out another suspicious detail. The stocking used to strangle Danielle didn't belong to her. As Luis explained, Danielle never wore stockings, implying that the killer must have brought it with them. Without evidence, investigators turned their attention to Danielle's past, suspecting a connection between her previous relationships and what happened to her. They questioned her friends about her relationship with Carl, Tristan's father. Her best friend informed the police about Eddie, an ex-boyfriend from when Danielle was already pregnant. Eddie's behavior became increasingly violent and controlling as their relationship progressed, eventually forbidding her from seeing friends and family. After giving birth to Tristan, their relationship further deteriorated, with Eddie starting to use illegal substances. This led Danielle to end the relationship, moving out to start anew. However, Eddie refused to accept rejection, behaving erratically. Consequently, Danielle sought a restraining order, which Eddie repeatedly violated by calling her, parking near her home, and even showing up at her workplace. Danielle's family informed investigators that Eddie had been calling her multiple times in the recent months, insisting on meeting her, but she would always hang up on him. To the detectives, Eddie seemed like the perfect suspect, so they located him and brought him in for questioning. Eddie was hostile and resistant to going to the police station. When he spoke about Danielle, it was clear that it enraged him. When questioned about his relationship with Danielle, his account contradicted what her family members had said. He asserted that he had never been violent towards her and denied any involvement in her death, claiming he hadn't spoken to her in over a year. However, the investigators knew he was lying because they checked Danielle's call history, which revealed that Eddie had indeed been calling her in the months preceding her death. To determine Eddie's whereabouts during the attack on Danielle, the police investigated his alibi. Eddie claimed to have been working far away from the Ashley Lakes apartments at the time, driving out of state as a tow truck driver. His boss corroborated Eddie's story, providing motel and gas receipts that proved he was out of state on the day Danielle died. This new evidence led to yet another dead end for the investigators. Similarly, Carl, Tristan's father, was also cleared from the list of suspects. 3 days after Danielle's death, a crucial lead emerged that altered the investigation's course. While interviewing Ashley Lake's apartment's residents, the police spoke with a woman who shared a strange encounter that had taken place a week prior to Danielle's death. According to her, she was awakened one morning by a knock on the door. After getting out of bed to look through the peephole, she saw no one. She returned to bed, but about a minute later, she heard the front door slam shut. Feeling scared, she got out of bed again, only to find a maintenance man standing in her living room. He claimed to be there to fix something in her apartment. However, the woman felt uneasy because he seemed more interested in looking at her than doing his job. Although she didn't know his name, she provided the police with a detailed description of him. Management at Ashley Lake's apartments informed investigators about a separate incident involving another woman. This woman reported that a man she didn't know had entered her apartment, claiming he was there to perform maintenance and replace light bulbs. When she told him she didn't have any light bulbs that needed changing, he became flustered and said, "Maybe I have the wrong apartment," before leaving. At Ashley Lake's apartments, there were 2 maintenance specialists on staff, but only one of them matched the description provided by the 2 women, 42-year-old Calvin Oliver. When the investigator showed the women Oliver's photo, they both positively identified him. Notably, Oliver had only begun working at the complex in September 1998. Prior to Danielle's death, a total of 10 residents reported that items including cash, checks, jewelry, and computers had gone missing from their apartments. What's more, there was no evidence of forced entry on the front doors of these apartments. In fact, one of the residents even suspected that the perpetrator was a member of the staff. Calvin Oliver was a prime suspect in the apartment robbery cases due to his living in the same residential complex, allowing him to move around freely without raising any suspicions. Moreover, Oliver possessed a master key, granting him unrestricted access to all apartments. The investigators decided to probe into Oliver's potential connection to Danielle Jennings. It emerged that Oliver had performed some work in Danielle's apartment a couple of weeks prior to her death, making him a person of interest. Given his access to the apartment and knowledge of Danielle and her fiancé Luis's work schedules, it was possible that Oliver had entered their apartment undetected. Perhaps Danielle had returned home for lunch, only to find Oliver already inside her apartment. Investigators brought Calvin Oliver in for questioning, initially asking about the thefts that had prompted complaints from some residents of Ashley Lake's apartments. Oliver denied any involvement in these incidents. When questioned about Danielle Jennings, he claimed to be aware of what had happened to her, but insisted he didn't know her personally. The only admission he made was that he had done some work in her apartment. At that point, the police didn't have any concrete evidence linking Oliver to the crime. Before releasing him, they decided to run a check on Oliver in their database. The results were shocking. Oliver was found to have an outstanding warrant in another jurisdiction for failing to appear in court on a burglary charge. This charge was related to the theft of personal checks. Furthermore, Oliver had a long history of criminal activity, dating back to 1974. According to records from the Georgia Department of Correction, by the age of 18, Oliver had already been convicted of several serious crimes, including multiple residential burglaries, armed robbery, robbery using force, larceny, and forcing a woman into intimate contact at knife point. As a result, he spent most of his life behind bars. Oliver had a motive to harm Danielle if she caught him in her apartment, as he didn't want to go back to prison with an active warrant out for his arrest. After the police took him in, they had more time to investigate his possible role in her death. While looking into the thefts at Ashley Lake's apartments, the police got a search warrant for Oliver's apartment. Inside, they found stolen items belonging to other residents and, crucially, Danielle's wedding ring, which connected Oliver to her murder. 9 days following Danielle Jennings' death, Calvin Oliver was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and burglary. During the interrogation, investigators asked Oliver about the stolen wedding ring. He claimed that he had taken it about 3 weeks prior to her death. However, several witnesses contradicted his statement, reporting that they had seen the ring on Danielle's finger the day before her body was discovered. After being caught in this inconsistency, Oliver refused to cooperate and provide further information. At the trial, the prosecutor claimed that Oliver murdered Danielle when she came home unexpectedly and caught him in the act of stealing. Following a 5-day trial that concluded on October 13, 2000, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts against Oliver. The court subsequently sentenced him to life imprisonment for Danielle Jennings' murder, plus an additional 20 years for the theft of her wedding ring. Danielle's mother and stepfather, Sherry and Philip Jennings, eventually gained custody of her son, Tristan. It was later revealed that the management of Ashley Lake's apartments knew about Oliver's criminal past, but failed to check his background thoroughly. They also didn't warn other residents when a series of thefts occurred. When this information became known, Danielle's family sued Ashley Lake's apartments. The Jennings family brought claims for negligent hiring and retention, failure to provide adequate security, and failure to warn residents, among other charges. They sought punitive damages. Following the trial, the jury returned a verdict in excess of $13 million for wrongful death and for pain and suffering. The jury also awarded $2.5 million in punitive damages, an amount later reduced to $250,000 based on the finding that there was no specific intent to harm. According to plaintiff attorneys, the complex's key policy was also flawed. Employees had access to residents' keys, and the lockbox containing the keys to the complex's 240 apartments was often left unsecured. Calvin Oliver is presently incarcerated and serving a life sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Nicole Laub. Around 5 p.m. on August 19, 2014, a man called Portland's Emergency Services in Oregon, USA, to report a woman who had been stabbed in the chest. The victim was still alive but struggling to breathe, so the caller urged the operator to send an ambulance to the Timber Creek apartments as quickly as possible. As police officers rushed to the scene, they had no idea that the victim's final words would hold the key to cracking the case. The victim, later identified as Nicole Laub, had been receiving assistance from the couple living at the crime scene when paramedics arrived. Despite their best efforts, Nicole sadly succumbed to her injuries, but not before uttering a crucial phrase. The detectives spoke with the 911 caller, who provided a more detailed account of what had occurred. While walking down the stairs of the apartment building towards the parking lot with his wife, the man heard a scream. He turned to his right and saw a woman running towards them, shouting, "He stabbed me! He stabbed me!" The woman explained to the couple that she did not know her attacker, but was able to describe him as wearing camo pants and a black hoodie. The manager of the Timber Creek Apartments identified a 29-year-old colleague, Nicole Laub, as the victim. She had been working as a leasing consultant at the complex for a few weeks. On August 19th, as part of her duties, Nicole drove a golf cart around the complex to deliver lease renewal letters to residents. Each applicable resident also received a balloon tied to a package of popcorn. Based on Nicole's notes and the map found in the golf cart, detectives pinpointed the likely location of the attack to a specific stairwell breezeway at Timber Creek. They also discovered several pieces of evidence that supported this theory, including a trail of blood droplets leading from the stairwell and leaflets scattered at the foot of the stairs. During the investigation led by the Washington County Sheriff's Office, multiple witnesses came forward reporting a suspicious individual described as a young male wearing a black hoodie and camel-colored pants, seen in the vicinity of Timber Creek around the time of the attack. By analyzing the reports and timelines of each sighting, detectives were able to reconstruct the path the suspect took to enter and exit Timber Creek. Over 20 law enforcement officers aided by K-9 units conducted an intensive search. The Washington County Search and Rescue Team focused on the wooded areas surrounding Cedar Mill Creek, which flows through the Timber Creek apartment complex. During the search, several items were found and sent to the lab for analysis to determine their potential evidentiary value. While the detectives did not reveal the specifics of their discoveries, they stated that they were exploring every possible scenario. The investigators were working to determine the motive behind the brazen daylight attack in an apartment complex home to over 1,000 residents. They informed Chris Lobb, Nicole's husband, about the incident. Nicole already had a daughter when she met Chris, who had 2 daughters from previous relationships. The couple later had a son together after getting married. As a teenager, Nicole survived cancer and developed an interest in fitness and bodybuilding. She took part in competitions and aspired to become a coach someday. The police took steps to identify the perpetrator, ruling out robbery as a motive, since nothing was stolen and no attempt was made to remove her clothes. This led detectives to suspect that the attack might be motivated by personal reasons, prompting them to focus their attention on Chris, Nicole's husband. As William once wrote, "Love that transcends this world cannot be separated by it. Death cannot destroy what is immortal." Nicole was an extraordinary woman, a devoted wife, exceptional mother, and a friend to everyone. She was never afraid to express her faith or opinions openly with others. Her ultimate goal was to leave this world a better place than when she entered it. Meanwhile, during interviews with Timber Creek Apartments residents, police identified 2 additional witnesses who reported seeing a man wearing a black hoodie and camouflage pants. This couple claimed to have seen a man matching the suspect's description running across the road without looking around, approximately at the same time Nicole was attacked. The witnesses saw the man, with his hood up, running towards the houses directly across the street from the Timber Creek Apartments. Based on witness descriptions, detectives created a composite sketch of the suspect, which was promptly distributed throughout the city and featured on television news programs. Authorities urged anyone who recognized the individual, even if only slightly, to come forward with information. Detectives collaborated with their informants, seeking any information that could lead them to the murderer's whereabouts. The suspect's sketch generated several promising leads. One such lead came from a man who claimed his son was acquainted with an individual named Taylor. Allegedly, Taylor had been intimidating people with a knife recently. The police located Taylor and brought him in for questioning. During the interrogation, Taylor made some bizarre statements, leading investigators to suspect he might be struggling with mental health issues. When asked about Nicole, Taylor responded unequivocally, stating he was responsible for her death. However, his story was riddled with inconsistencies, parroting details from the news and fabricating unrelated information. Consequently, the police ruled Taylor out as a suspect. After the police released the suspect's sketch to the news, they received a new lead about a man named Nick with a prior criminal record. Although Nick bore some resemblance to the sketch, his criminal history did not involve physical harm to others. The police brought Nick in for questioning, but his behavior raised suspicions. When questioned about Nicole's case, Nick denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Following this, the police obtained a search warrant for Nick's home, where they found a black hoodie and camouflage pants. However, the hoodie did not match the witness's description, as it featured a prominent white logo on the front. The police sent the clothing to the lab for analysis, but no evidence linking Nick to the crime was found. They also obtained Nick's mobile phone records, which showed he was not near the crime scene at the time of Nicole's attack. As a result, the police cleared Nick as a suspect, and the investigation came to a standstill. Chris Lobby spoke to reporters about the difficult time his family was going through. He couldn't shake off the thoughts of what had happened to Nicole, his mind constantly racing with unanswered questions and different scenarios. "The hardest part is not having answers," he said. The police were concerned the perpetrator might strike again, and sadly, their fears were realized. On September 13, 2014, just 3 weeks after Nicole's death, the Eugene Police Department in Oregon received a disturbing call. Eugene is Oregon's second-largest city, located about 100 miles from Portland. On September 13th, a resident was attacked while leaving a bar near Autzen Stadium after watching a game. That evening, 39-year-old Heather Miller had gone to a nearby bar to watch the game. When the game ended around 8 p.m., she decided to head home. Since the streets were almost empty, she left the bar to call a cab, but discovered her phone was out of battery. Her next move was to walk closer to the stadium in hopes of hailing a taxi. While walking along the sidewalk, she soon noticed that someone was walking behind her. Crossing to the other side of the street and turning around, she saw that the man following her had done the same. She quickened her pace, but soon felt a blow to the back of her head, which knocked her unconscious. When she regained consciousness, she found herself face to face with the criminal, who by this time had pulled off her pants in an effort to fulfill what was most likely the motive for the attack. Heather tried to reason with him. She told him she had a daughter and asked him to please let her see her daughter again, but he kept punching her regardless. Heather said that for every word she uttered, she received a punch in the face. At some point, Heather realized that her only chance to survive was to pretend to be dead. She closed her eyes and didn't move. When the attacker got what he wanted, he immediately ran away. This man severely beat Heather, but she found the strength to stand up and walk out into the middle of the road. A minute later, a car stopped and the driver called 911. Paramedics soon arrived and took her to the hospital. She was conscious and was able to talk to a detective who arrived soon after. At that time, neither she nor the detective knew that the one who attacked her was already at the police station. There's a park near the stadium where the man attacked Heather. A policeman on a bicycle was on duty there that evening. He saw a man running away, stopped him, and noticed that his hands and shoes were bloody. The officer detained him and called a patrol car, which took the detainee to the police station. Despite his age, 17-year-old Jamie Tinoco had repeatedly come to the attention of the police. At the time of his arrest, he was on probation for unlawful possession. Tinoco started using substances at the age of 12, and according to his parents, they could not control him. He dropped out of high school when he was a freshman, and just a day before the attack on Heather Meir, he was arrested for driving without a driver's license but was soon released. During interrogation, Tinoco confessed to attacking Heather. The guy behaved absolutely calmly and indifferently because he had believed he'd done nothing wrong. His behavior gave the Eugene Police Department reason to assume that Heather was not his first victim. The police released his photo, thinking that there might be other women affected by his actions who would come forward. After releasing Tinoco's photo, the Eugene police caught the attention of detectives investigating Nicole Lobb's death. They noticed that Tinoco's facial features bore a strong resemblance to those of the suspect in their composite sketch. As they dug deeper, they discovered that Tinoco resided with his parents in Portland, and their apartment was conveniently located directly across the street from Timber Creek. This alarming coincidence further fueled their suspicion that Tinoco might be the perpetrator responsible for Nicole Loeb's tragic demise. The detectives questioned Jamie about Nicole Loeb's case, hoping he would admit to assaulting her, just as he had confessed to assaulting Heather Miller. However, Tinoco denied any involvement in Nicole's death and refused to answer their questions. Consequently, the police had to search for evidence to connect him to Nicole Loeb's murder. Jamie Tinoco had lived with his parents in a residence directly opposite the Timber Creek apartment complex. Following this, the police secured a search warrant for his parents' apartment, whereupon they discovered a black hoodie and camouflage pants in Jamie's room. These items were subsequently sent to a laboratory for analysis. Nevertheless, the laboratory report proved disappointing, as it did not reveal any DNA evidence linking Nicole to any of Jamie Tinoco's possessions, and consequently the investigation stalled. Although there was no conclusive proof that Tinoco was responsible for Nicole's death, there was a significant amount of evidence connecting him to the assault on Heather Miller. During the trial related to the attack on Heather Miller, Tinoco did not dispute his involvement and even seemed to take pride in his actions, presenting himself as a youthful gang member. He was unapologetic, smiling, and conveying a sense of no remorse for what he had done. Tinoco had wandered away from a group of young offenders who were on a supervised trip with the Washington County Juvenile Department. He approached Heather from behind, hit her, knocking her out, and then pulled her into the bushes near Watson Stadium. As a result of the attack, Heather still experiences nightmares and flashbacks. She also suffered physical harm, including a chipped front tooth. Additionally, the attack left her with a broken nose and other injuries that required reconstructive surgery to fix. Since then, Heather has had to cope with the trauma by finding a new job, and even now, she becomes uncomfortable when people approach her from behind or when she walks alone on the street, especially at night. Heather Miller clutched two family members' hands as she sat with more than a dozen supporters before reading her statement aloud in the Lane County Circuit Court. Tinoco appeared to be grinning in court as the victim stood recalling the disturbing details of her attack, how she begged for her life to see her daughter again. When the judge asked Tinoco why he was grinning, he said he didn't know. The judge said the fact that he showed no remorse scared her and called Tinoco a danger to the public, imposing a maximum sentence. The victim, surrounded by her friends and family, walked out of the courtroom. As a brave mother of two, she had told the judge that she prayed Tinoco would never have the chance to harm anyone else in the same way. Refusing to be defined by her ordeal, she was determined to read her statement aloud and make her voice heard, demonstrating remarkable strength and resilience from the very beginning. The judge was not swayed by the defense's portrayal of Tinoco as a teenager whose actions were influenced by years of substance abuse. Instead, the judge formed an opinion about Tinoco's character based on his behavior in the courtroom. Tinoco's lawyer, Chris Schaffner, requested a prison sentence of 8 years and 4 months for his client. However, when the judge gave Tinoco the opportunity to address the court, he failed to apologize, despite his emotional parents sitting just a few rows behind him. Judge Deborah Vogt sentenced Tinoco to 14 years and 2 months in prison, saying his apparent lack of remorse warranted the long sentence and that the community needs to be protected from a dangerous man. She said that by the time Tinoco is eligible to be released, he'll be in his early 30s and will have to register as a sex offender for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, investigators exploited Tinoco's exaggerated self-importance to extract a confession from him. They re-questioned him about Nicole Loeb's death, suggesting that he would gain more respect from fellow inmates if they knew he had taken a woman's life. After a brief silence, Tinoco began discussing Nicole, claiming he hadn't intended to harm her. He confessed that he had wanted to stab someone merely to experience the feeling. According to him, his goal wasn't to kill Nicole, but rather to injure her. He recounted that, after crossing the street from his apartment to Timber Creek, he saw Nicole parking a golf cart and carrying a small package containing a balloon to an upstairs apartment. As Nicole ascended the stairs, he hid behind a golf cart, then rushed to the stairs. And when she returned downstairs, he took a deep breath and stabbed her. Tinoco said he chose Nicole because she looked like easy prey. When asked if he had tried to force Nicole into intimacy, as he did with Heather Miller, he replied that he was thinking about doing the same. He was going to do the same. He stated that he didn't do it only because Nicole screamed really loud when he stabbed her, so he ran away. During the reenactment of the crime, Tinoco demonstrated to the investigators how he had escaped from the crime scene. Chris Laub expressed his shock upon learning that the individual responsible for taking his wife's life was only 17 years old. He stated, "As a father of a 13-year-old daughter, it's incomprehensible to think that someone just 4 years older than her could commit such a heinous act." The trial, which started in 2015, took an interesting turn when Tinoco proclaimed his innocence in court, contradicting his earlier confession during the interrogation. His lawyer emphasized that there was no DNA evidence to connect his client to the crime scene. Defense attorney Robert Axford made an emotional plea, saying, "I'm simply asking for mercy for this 17-year-old child who is severely mentally ill and has the potential to change his behavior with proper treatment to rectify the deep-seated issues he's struggling with." The defense called a second psychologist to testify who had assessed Tinoco and concluded that he showed symptoms of schizophrenia. In contrast, a psychologist from the Oregon State Hospital, who had also examined Tinoco, disagreed, diagnosing a personality disorder rather than schizophrenia. Ultimately, the jury was convinced of Tinoco's guilt after viewing a video recording of his confession and a reenactment of the crime, which was part of the investigative experiment. During the reenactment of the crime, Tinoco revealed specific details that only the perpetrator who attacked Nicole Laube could have known. In the penalty phase, the jury faced two options: sentencing Tinoco to life imprisonment without parole, or to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. However, the jury decided that there were not enough mitigating circumstances to justify a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Consequently, Tinoco was found guilty on all counts in 2017. Tinoco, who was already 20 years old at the time, was standing at the front of a Washington County courtroom between his two attorneys as Circuit Judge Kirsten Thompson asked if he had any words before she officially sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He held his hands down below his waist in front of him, his mouth twitching. "I ask for forgiveness," Tinoco said. He then sat down. Chris Laub, Nicole's husband, said Tinoco's family approached his family after the sentencing. They expressed condolences and apologized. In 2021, the Oregon Court of Appeals overturned the 2017 conviction of Tinoco. Since his trial, juvenile laws have changed significantly. Tinoco was convicted of a Measure 11 crime, but under current juvenile reforms, offenders between 15 and 17 years old are no longer automatically sent to adult court. Instead, prosecutors must request a hearing to decide whether juveniles accused of serious crimes should be tried as adults. If Tinoco is retried and reconvicted, his defense team may seek a lesser sentence. The Laube family, including Nicole's father, Rich Jones, were shocked and saddened by the overturned conviction, knowing they would have to relive the emotional trauma of the trial. Despite the setback, Tinoco remains in prison, and the Nicole Laube case is far from over. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Cassie Farrington. In 2014, the townspeople of Silver City, a small town in southwestern New Mexico, were stunned to discover that 23-year-old Cassie Farrington, a local resident, had been found dead in the bathtub of her rental home, lying face down in the water. The tragedy was devastating for Cassie's parents, and things took a turn for the worse when the local police got involved in the investigation. Cassie Marie Brooks was born in Virginia on December 22, 1990, the second oldest of 4 children to Chuck and Darlene Brooks. As a high-achieving student, she was a member of the National Honor Society, played sports, and dreamed of becoming a doctor. But when she turned 16, her plans took a dramatic turn. She became pregnant. The following month saw a whirlwind of significant events. She graduated from high school, gave birth to a baby, married Bradley Farrington, and moved out of her parents' home. After having her first child, Cassie went on to have a second child several years later. Unfortunately, her family life began to fall apart around the same time, and her marriage ultimately ended in divorce when she was just 22. Following her divorce, Cassie moved to Silver City, a small town with a population of around 10,000 people, with her 2 kids in tow. There, she found work as a nurse at a local hospital and rented a home from a colleague. By her 23rd birthday, Cassie had begun a new romance with a man named David Barry, who rapidly formed a strong connection with her 2 children. Cassie confided in her family and colleagues that David brought her and the kids immense joy, and she was optimistic about finally achieving the happiness and peace that had eluded her in her previous tumultuous experience with family life. On March 24, 2014, Cassie phoned her parents after finishing her night shift at Silver City Hospital. During their several-minute conversation, she informed her mother of her plan: drive home, collect her kids, take them to school, and then return home to rest for a couple of hours before picking them up again later that day. However, the school staff attempted to contact Cassie, but she never showed up to collect the children. Cassie's mother, Darlene, attempted to reach her daughter by phone but didn't get an answer, assuming Cassie had simply forgotten to set her alarm after working a night shift. Next, Darlene contacted Sherelle, Cassie's landlord, asking her to check on Cassie. Upon arriving at the house, Sherelle knocked on the door but received no response. She then circled around the house and noticed water overflowing from the bathroom into the kitchen. Sherelle knocked on the door again, this time more forcefully, and called out Cassie's name, but there was still no response. Finally, she used her own key to unlock the house and enter. As Sherelle made her way across the wet floor towards the bathroom, the sound of flowing water grew louder and more distinct. Her voice trembled slightly as she repeatedly called out Cassie's name. When she finally reached the bathroom, Sherelle's worst fears were confirmed. Cassie lay face down in the overflowing bathtub, still wearing her house robe, with water continuing to pour out. Cassie's co-worker Sherelle, who was trained in first aid, quickly realized that it was too late to try to save her. Cassie's body had already begun to stiffen, which meant she had been dead for several hours. Sherelle immediately called 911 to report what had happened, and soon paramedics and police officers arrived at the house. Sadly, Sherelle also had to call Cassie's parents to break the devastating news that their daughter had passed away. As Sherelle waited for the paramedics to arrive, she thoroughly searched the house and made a disturbing discovery. In the second bathroom, located in a different part of the house, she found that the faucet was open and water was continuously flowing. Fortunately, this bathroom was equipped with an overflow protection device, which prevented the excess water from flooding the floor. Instead, it was safely draining away. Sherelle's attention was also drawn to the towel rack, which had been ripped from the wall and was now lying on the floor. Chuck and Darlene immediately stopped what they were doing and rushed from their home in Arizona to Silver City upon receiving the news. A couple of hours later, they arrived at the house where their daughter's lifeless body had been found. At that point, the police were already on the scene, and their investigation revealed that there were no signs of forced entry into the house, as all the locks were still intact, the windows were closed, and the glass was unbroken. Valuables that might have been stolen in a break-in were left untouched in the house. This led the local police chief to ask Cassie's parents if she had a history of suicidal tendencies, and if she had any reason to take her own life. However, Chuck and Darlene strongly denied this possibility, insisting that Cassie would never do such a thing because she would not put her children through such distress. Despite their objections, the police chief repeatedly suggested that Cassie had likely orchestrated her own disappearance, almost as if he was trying to convince them of this theory. Normally, a thorough investigation of the accident scene would take days, but in this case, the police left the premises just a few hours after the body was discovered, informing Chuck and Darlene that they were free to use the house. This haste puzzled Cassie's parents, and they decided to conduct their own investigation of the house. Upon inspection, they found water still in the bathtub, and when they emptied it, they noticed black streaks on the sides, similar to the marks left by rubber-soled shoes on the floor. Furthermore, they discovered various personal belongings of Cassie's scattered around, including her glasses, hairband, and a coat hanger. With all of these circumstances, Chuck and Darlene suspected that the authorities might be trying to hastily close their daughter's case as non-criminal, particularly since the police hadn't searched the house for fingerprints. It wasn't until they made a call to the DA's office that the police seemed to put in more effort, or at least gave the appearance of doing so. They likely would have preferred to close Cassie's case earlier, but the medical examiner's report made that impossible. The report revealed that Cassie's body had multiple bruises, including on her neck, and the forensic medical examiner's conclusion was that her death was a homicide, although the exact method was not specified. The scene of the crime was no longer helpful because the property owners had cleaned up and made minor renovations after the incident. As a result, the police had no new information to share with Cassie's parents over the months. The police investigated David Barry, the man Cassie had met before her death, but he was ruled out as a suspect due to his solid alibi. As time went on, Cassie's parents grew increasingly convinced that the local police were not doing enough. It wasn't until Chuck and Darlene met with the chief district attorney again and requested action be taken against Detective Jose Sanchez, who was in charge of the investigation into their daughter's death, that things started moving forward. After reviewing the case file, the district attorney agreed that Sanchez had made numerous errors. As a result, Sanchez was taken off the case, and a more seasoned detective was assigned to take over. The new detective immediately focused on the individual that Chuck and Darlene suspected was responsible for their daughter's death. From the beginning, Cassie's family and close friends were convinced that only one person had a motive to kill her: her ex-husband, Bradley Farrington. At the time of her death, Cassie and Bradley were in conflict and engaged in a bitter custody battle over their children. It was likely that the court would have ruled in favor of the children staying with their mother. It was clear to everyone that Bradley stood to gain the most from Cassie's death, as he would gain custody of the children and be relieved of his child support obligations. Many questions likely arise from this, such as why Bradley wasn't immediately considered a suspect and why he wasn't scrutinized from day one. To the average person, the answers to these questions are obvious. However, looking ahead, it's likely that officials at all levels will deny the obvious conclusions. In reality, Bradley's status as a Silver City police officer and his friendly relationships with the investigators who came to Cassie's house likely shielded him from suspicion. He left the police force just a few months before Cassie's death. In addition to having a motive, Bradley also had the necessary expertise. As a former policeman, he was familiar with police procedures and knew how to destroy evidence. The bathwater had removed any potential DNA samples from the body and erased the shoe prints on the floor. Therefore, there would have been no need for him to break down the front door, as Cassie would have opened it for him herself. Any evidence that might have linked Bradley Farrington to the crime scene was likely destroyed due to the local police's flawed investigation. The only remaining option to hold Bradley accountable was through eyewitness testimony. Cassie told her parents that Bradley regularly abused her and the kids. He even mocked her, saying she should try reporting him to the police. At the time, Bradley was a police officer in Silver City and believed he was above the law. It's hard to imagine how Cassie felt, knowing that the police, who were supposed to help her, were friends with her abusive husband. Cassie confided in her co-workers that Bradley had threatened to make her disappear, saying no one would ever find out. One day in Silver City, Cassie burst into an insurance office, extremely terrified. She reported to the staff that her husband had just tried to drive her car off the road. Tragically, Cassie was found dead on March 24, 2014. Fast forward 19 months, Bradley Farrington, 28, was arrested on October 23, 2015. When charged, he denied any involvement in Cassie's death, claiming he had no part in it. Because of the local police officer's misconduct, there was no physical evidence connecting Farrington to his ex-wife's death. As a result, the judge made the unusual decision to allow testimony from Cassie herself through her own words at the trial. During the trial, the prosecution presented numerous witnesses to the jury, including Cassie's parents, friends, and co-workers, all of whom she had confided in about the abuse she suffered at the hands of her police officer husband. Dr. Michael Hunter, San Francisco's leading forensic expert, testified at the trial, sharing his evaluation of the local expert's findings. With over 20 years of experience, he presented the jury with autopsy photographs and concluded that Cassie's death was likely caused by strangulation, citing the injuries on her neck as evidence. In his opinion, the primary cause of her death was strangulation. One witness, former Detective Sanchez, who had retired from the police force, came to court only after the judge issued a warrant. Sanchez had originally handled the case and testified at trial that he never considered Bradley Farrington a possible suspect, as there was no reason to do so. He explained that no fingerprints were taken from the house, stating that the crime scene appeared too clean. He believed the scene had been cleaned after the crime was committed, which was why no fingerprints were collected. Following 4.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found Bradley Farrington guilty on September 7, 2018. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole in 30 years. In 2020, Farrington appealed to the New Mexico Supreme Court, arguing that the trial court erred in allowing testimony from the victim's co-workers, friends, and family members, who recounted her statements about Farrington's threats and domestic violence. However, the state's highest court unanimously ruled that there was sufficient evidence to support Farrington's conviction and rejected his challenge to the hearsay testimony. Farrington is currently serving his sentence, while his 2 children are living with his parents, who are limiting their contact with the victim's parents. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Katie Sepich. On the morning of August 31, 2003, the lifeless body of 22-year-old Katie Sepich was discovered near a remote landfill in the desert of Las Cruces, New Mexico. She had last been seen by friends as she left a local house party following a night of bar hopping. It would take almost 4 years to identify her killer. Katie, a 22-year-old woman, was described by her mom as outspoken, vivacious, and intelligent. She grew up in Carlsbad, New Mexico, as the oldest of 3 siblings. After graduating with a business degree from New Mexico State University, she was planning to start graduate school in the fall to pursue her MBA. At the time, Katie worked as a waitress at a local Mexican restaurant. Katie was an extremely outgoing individual who formed a close bond with a guy named Joe Bischoff while attending university. Initially, their connection was platonic, but it soon blossomed into romance. Katie confided in her mother, Jeanne, about her deep-seated happiness with Joe and her desire to forge a long-term partnership with him. A short while later, Joe presented her with a diamond engagement ring. After graduating from university in the summer of 2003, Katie and Joe's relationship faced challenges. While Katie opted to pursue further studies at the university, Joe moved back to his parents' place in Gallup, New Mexico, a small city approximately 350 miles away from Las Cruces. Katie was devastated when Joe had to depart. Although their long-distance relationship was extremely challenging, they still found ways to reunite occasionally. During the Labor Day weekend of 2003, Joe visited Las Cruces, and Katie was ecstatic. Sadly, their brief time together took a tragic turn. On Saturday, August 30th, 2003, Katie spent the evening with Joe and their friends, bar hopping before heading to a local house party. However, after the party, Katie vanished. The following day, Katie's mom, Jan, received a life-changing phone call. As a mother, Jane cherished Katie, her remarkable, outgoing, vibrant, and intelligent daughter, who always lit up the room with her infectious laughter. Katie's roommate was on the other end of the line, desperately seeking Jane's help in locating Katie, having already contacted all her friends and local hospitals, but to no avail, with no sign of Katie anywhere. Veronica, who shared a room with Katie, informed Jana that Katie had departed from the party by herself that evening. Although Veronica and Joe had assumed Katie had gone home, they fell asleep at the party venue, only to discover the next morning that she was missing. Katie's family subsequently contacted the police to report her disappearance. Around the same time, a partially clothed female body was found near a desert landfill. Although there was no identification nearby, police officers who responded to the scene determined that the body had been there for less than 24 hours. It was clear to them that the woman's death was not accidental. The victim was estimated to be between 20 and 25 years old, and her partial nudity, from the waist down, suggested that the motive behind the crime was likely sexual. She had defensive wounds on her arms, suggesting she fought back against her attacker and scratched them in the process. The police found skin cells from the ass avalant under her fingernails, which provided a crucial DNA sample. There were also signs of strangulation on her neck, indicating this was likely the cause of her death. Despite this, there was no evidence of a struggle at the scene where the body was found, leading investigators to believe she died elsewhere. It appeared the killer moved her body to the remote desert landfill in an attempt to delay its discovery. On the victim's body, another shocking discovery was made. Burn marks were found on her arms and back. These marks suggested that the perpetrator attempted to either dispose of the body or destroy evidence, and in doing so, they intentionally set the victim on fire. The police quickly linked Katie's disappearance to the discovery of a young woman's body. Katie's father then went to the mortuary to identify the body. According to Katie's mother, Jeanne, after a few hours of agonizing uncertainty, their worst fears were confirmed. The body was indeed Katie's. The pain was overwhelming, and they were consumed by grief. They felt trapped in a desperate situation with no escape, as if all happiness and hope had been lost, leaving no future ahead. Katie's father was required to identify the body of his beloved daughter. He later recounted to the investigators that when they pulled back the sheet, revealing her bruised and contorted face, he was overcome with emotion, dropped to his knees, and prayed to God to take his own life, overwhelmed by grief. The residents of Las Cruces, once a peaceful place, were left horrified by the traumatic event that befell Katie. With a sense of urgency, the police launched an extensive investigation to apprehend the perpetrator as quickly as possible, largely driven by the fear that this individual might strike again. To better understand Katie's case, the police started by reconstructing the final hours of her life. They sought to establish her whereabouts, her companions, and her activities during that time, as well as whether she had any altercations or enemies. Since the party venue was approximately a mile from Katie's home, the police had to ascertain whether she had managed to return home safely. The investigators' first interviews were with Veronica, Katie's roommate, and Joe, her boyfriend. It struck them as odd that these two had stayed at the party while Katie had departed alone in the middle of the night. Joe displayed a lack of willingness to cooperate with the police, stating that Katie had left the party of her own accord, and had intentionally left behind her purse, phone, and keys. The detectives thoroughly examined Katie's route, conducting a door-to-door inquiry and speaking with local residents. But regrettably, no one witnessed or overheard anything unusual. A promising lead indicated that Katie had arrived at her house but failed to enter, as she had departed without her keys. The investigators conducted a thorough search of the house and its surroundings, discovering Katie's shoes outside her bedroom window. It seemed that she had attempted to re-enter the house through the window, but was suddenly attacked. The footprints in the gravel beside the house supported this theory. Katie had put up a fierce fight for her life, but unfortunately, her attacker proved to be stronger. The investigators proposed that after killing Katie, the perpetrator transported her body to the desert landfill and attempted to burn it. They started questioning whether the perpetrator was a stranger or someone Katie knew and trusted. Since around 40 people had attended the party, the investigators looked into the possibility that someone might have trailed Katie when she went home and attacked her, possibly even her boyfriend Joe. When the police questioned Joe again, they told him they were aware that he and Katie had a dispute because she caught him kissing another girl. Joe confirmed this was true and stated that after Katie left, he followed her in his car. But he didn't enter her home because he saw her bedroom light was off and thought she was asleep. So he went back to the party. The investigators stumbled upon another peculiar aspect of Joe's behavior. After leaving the party, he frequently dialed Katie's cell phone, which was still in her purse, and persisted in doing so until morning. The question was whether Joe was attempting to establish an alibi for himself or feigned concern for Katie's well-being. The investigators wanted Joe to explain his suspicious behavior, but he refused to cooperate with them any further. Despite loving Joe deeply, Katie's family was shocked when he failed to attend her funeral, which only fueled their suspicions. In the end, the investigators only needed one thing to clear Joe's name: a DNA sample. Experts discovered DNA samples at 3 different locations on Katie's body, with most of it located under her fingernails. The DNA was identified as human skin cells. Notably, all the DNA samples found on Katie's body came from the same individual. The police were keen to compare Joe's DNA with the DNA recovered from Katie's body, but they faced obstacles in doing so. At the time, Joe was out of town, and his parents had hired a lawyer who informed the investigators that Joe had declined to provide a DNA sample for testing. It was clear to everyone that Joe was hiding something and was likely involved in Katie's death, judging by his behavior. The police were convinced of his guilt, but they needed to find a legal way to obtain his DNA to confirm their suspicions, which took some time. At the same time, investigators were examining alternative explanations. They were researching similar crimes to determine if Katie was the sole victim of whoever ended her life. The DNA samples discovered on her body were compared to a national database, but no matches were found. The investigators went back to the starting point of their inquiry, the party where everything began. They managed to track down all the male guests who had attended the party and requested that each of them provide a DNA sample. Every single one of them complied, since they claimed to have nothing to conceal. Nevertheless, the results of the DNA analysis did not yield any matches with the DNA traces found on Katie's body. This lack of a match led the investigators to refocus their attention on Joe, the solitary individual who had declined to provide his DNA sample. The investigators discovered an alternative approach. Prior to attending the party, Katie and Joe had spent time in her bedroom, where they had been physically intimate. The police subsequently visited the house and collected the sheet from Katie's bed, suspecting they might find Joe's DNA on it. Their hunch proved correct. The laboratory analysis did reveal a sample of male DNA, but it did not correspond to the DNA found on Katie's body. This meant that Joe was not the perpetrator who attacked her. If Joe wasn't involved in what happened to his girlfriend, why did he initially refuse to cooperate with the police? Once the police sent the test results to his lawyer, Joe discovered he had been cleared as a suspect. Following this, Joe changed his mind and decided to talk to the police again, even providing a DNA sample. The new test results confirmed the initial finding. Joe was innocent of the crime. Joe refused to cooperate with the police because he had previously had intimate contact with Katie before the party, and he feared they would discover his DNA on her body. Despite their best efforts, the police and Katie's family couldn't understand Joe's behavior on the night of her death. After Joe was cleared as a suspect, the police had to explore alternative theories. Several partygoers informed the investigators that Katie was wearing rings on her fingers that night, including one given to her by Joe. However, when Katie's body was found, her fingers were bare. The police suspected that the killer had removed the rings. They searched all local pawn shops, but failed to find Katie's stolen jewelry. Near where Katie's body was discovered, another potential lead emerged in the form of tire tracks. Forensic experts successfully identified the brand and model of the tires in question. Upon contacting the manufacturer, the police learned that these specific tires are typically fitted to pickup trucks. Regrettably, this new information failed to bring the authorities any closer to catching the perpetrator, and the case ultimately stalled. About a year after Katie's incident, a similar crime occurred in Wisconsin. In Green Bay, a girl was attacked and suffered the same brutal fate as Katie. She was also set on fire, but miraculously, she managed to survive. The victim credited her survival to feigning death, which led the attackers to leave her. Once they were gone, she put out the flames and sought help at a nearby residence. She claimed to have been attacked by 2 Hispanic males, but the evidence in Katie's case suggested only one perpetrator was involved. To determine if there was a link between the 2 crimes, DNA analysis was necessary. The victim from Wisconsin provided a detailed description of her attackers to the police. When the Green Bay police released the composite sketches, a local farmer recognized the men as his employees, Gregorio Morales and Juan, since one of them had relatives in Las Cruces and often visited them. As a result, both men were arrested, and the police investigating Katie's case believed they had finally identified the culprit. However, the results of the DNA examination proved otherwise. The samples did not match the DNA found on Katie's body. These 2 men were later convicted of assaulting a girl in Green Bay, but they were not connected to the Katie case. Morales was sentenced to 50 years in prison and Gregorio to 50 years. Thus, the investigators reached another dead end. The only evidence the police had were tire tracks from the crime scene and DNA samples of the perpetrator. Katie's family hoped that DNA would allow the police to identify the person who took their daughter's life, but there were problems with that. It was not legal to take a DNA sample from anyone arrested by the police. Jeanne, Katie's mom, expressed her surprise and frustration about this. They had lost their daughter to a monster, and they needed justice, to know who had done this and why. And most of all, they needed to know that he would be stopped from doing this again. The detective leading Katie's case informed Jeanne that the only evidence they possessed was DNA. During her fierce struggle to survive, Katie had managed to collect her killer's blood and skin underneath her fingernails. The police had successfully extracted a DNA profile from this evidence and uploaded it into CODIS, a national forensic database. Detective Jones clarified that every week, this DNA evidence would be automatically cross-checked against the offender database to search for a potential match. This news brought renewed hope to Katie's family, as they were confident that they would eventually identify their daughter's killer once a matching profile was found. Detective Jean casually mentioned that the perpetrator was such a menace he'd likely be arrested again soon, at which point his DNA would be collected and entered into the system, leading to his identification and eventual conviction. However, Detective Jones contradicted him, explaining that this process isn't possible in New Mexico or most other states, as it's against the law to collect DNA samples from someone simply because they've been arrested. 3.5 years after Katie's death, A significant breakthrough occurred in the case on December 18, 2006. A DNA sample was discovered that matched the DNA evidence found on Katie's body. The attacker was identified as 26-year-old Gabriel Avila, a married father of one who had no prior connection to Katie. Notably, Avila had a lengthy criminal history and had been released from prison just shortly before Katie's murder on November 13, 2003. Less than 3 months after killing Katie, Avila was caught and arrested for breaking into an apartment shared by 2 young women carrying a knife. Fortunately, the college roommates managed to avoid an attack by locking themselves in the bathroom and quickly calling the police. In March 2004, Avila was found guilty of aggravated burglary with the intention of committing aggravated assault. However, after being released on bail, Avila fled instead of facing justice. Avila could have been caught and arrested just 3 months after Katie's attack, but due to flaws in the system, it took 3.5 years to establish a connection between him and Katie's death. Avila evaded police for almost a year before being caught in November 2004, thanks to a tip. He received a 9-year prison sentence, and a DNA sample was taken when he entered prison, but it sat untested for another 2 years. When the results finally came back, showing a partial match to DNA from Katie's crime scene, investigators sprang into action, tracking down the truck Avila used to dispose of her body, where they found a ring that belonged to Katie. This case highlights the need for system change. The police wasted resources and time searching for the perpetrator for 3 years, which could have been avoided if they had taken a DNA sample from Avila during his initial arrest. Moreover, it is astonishing that his DNA sample was only tested 2 years later, in 2006. Detectives investigating Katie's case visited Avila in prison after finding her ring in his pickup truck. Avila confessed to the crime, explaining that he had been in the area that night to buy illegal substances while his wife was away. He claimed that he offered Katie a ride when he saw her, but she declined. Later, he saw her again outside her house and stopped to offer help when she said she couldn't get in because she didn't have her purse. Katie tried to climb into her bedroom window, but Avila attacked and undressed her. Unsure what to do next, Avila strangled Katie, fearing she would identify him later. He then put her body in his pickup truck and drove to a desert landfill, where he dumped her body and attempted to set it on fire to destroy evidence, but his plan failed. Avila's DNA sample was recollected, and it matched DNA evidence found on Katie's body from 2003. Her parents were hopeful this new finding would lead to a swift investigation. However, they were shocked to discover that, in New Mexico and nearly every other state, it was illegal to collect DNA samples from individuals upon arrest. Instead, DNA was only entered into the system after someone had been convicted and sentenced to prison. This discovery prompted Katie's parents to launch a nationwide campaign, seeking to pass a law in all 50 states requiring individuals arrested for violent crimes to provide a DNA sample. The DNA would then be added to the CODIS national database, facilitating investigations and potentially solving crimes. In 2006, Katie's law was passed by the New Mexico state legislature with a near-unanimous vote of only 5 dissenting voices, and was subsequently signed into law in March 2006. Following the relentless advocacy of Katie's parents, the legislation was eventually adopted at the federal level in 2010. To date, over 31 states have enacted laws similar to New Mexico's Katie's Law. Katie's father, David, had long feared that another person would suffer the same fate as his daughter at the hands of her killer. But with the law now in place, he can finally find some comfort and relief. Opponents of this policy argue it invades privacy and violates civil rights, while others note that DNA, unlike fingerprints, contains sensitive genetic information. In the case of United States versus Kincaid, a federal district court ruled that collecting DNA samples before conviction and including them in the National DNA Database does not violate constitutional rights. In 2017, Gabriel Avila's trial got underway. During the proceedings, Avila offered a heartfelt apology to Katie's family. His lawyer pleaded with the judge to show mercy, citing Avila's remorsefulness as a mitigating factor. District Attorney Susana Martinez countered that Avila had delayed his confession for over 3 years, only coming forward when confronted with irrefutable DNA evidence by detectives. At the sentencing hearing, Katie's father, David, addressed the judge, imploring him not to be lenient with the punishment. He argued that his family would never have the opportunity to see Katie again, and it was only fair that the person responsible for her death should not be allowed to experience freedom again in their own lifetime. In May 2007, Gabriel Avila was found guilty and received a 69-year prison sentence. He will be eligible for parole in 2043 after serving 30 years of his sentence. Jenna believes that true closure is unattainable, but she is now ready to move forward. She, her husband, and their 2 other children have been healing and progressing with their lives, and they cherish their remaining kids deeply. Additionally, Jenny has pledged that she and her husband will persist in their efforts to have Katie's Law enacted in all 50 states as a testament to their deceased daughter. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Autumn Taggart. Autumn Taggart, a single mother, lived in Windsor, a city near the Michigan-Ontario border, with her 9-year-old son Gavin in 2018. Despite her breakup with Gavin's father, Chris Sherwin, they remained on good terms to minimize the impact on their child. On Saturday, June 9, 2018, Autumn and Gavin spent the afternoon with Chris, and after grocery shopping together, he dropped them off at their 3rd-floor apartment. After Chris left, Gavin played video games with his mother before bedtime, unaware of the horrifying night that was about to unfold. Gavin woke up to a noise while it was still dark outside. Startled, he opened his eyes to see a strange man standing close to his bed. The man instructed Gavin to close his eyes and go back to sleep before leaving the room. Gavin knew his mother's room was located behind the wall to the right, as shown in the photo. About a minute later, he heard his mother scream. The boy had never felt such intense fear before. The screaming eventually stopped, and an eerie silence fell over the space. After a few minutes, Gavin fell asleep, overcome with exhaustion. Gavin woke up to find it was already morning. He got out of bed and went straight to his mother's room. He was met with a scene of utter destruction. Everything was smashed and broken. His mother, Autumn, was lying on the bed, but she wasn't asleep. At first, 9-year-old Gavin thought she was just resting, but the blood on her nose told a different story. The reality hit him like a ton of bricks. His mother was dead. Gavin was in denial, refusing to accept the truth. To distract himself from the grim reality, he spent the morning playing video games on his console and watching YouTube videos, trying to avoid the unpleasant fact that his deceased mother was lying in the next room. In the afternoon, Gavin couldn't take the pressure anymore and broke down in tears. He decided to confide in someone, so he went to his mother's room, took her phone, and messaged his father on Messenger. He typed out a desperate message. Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris and his girlfriend quickly got in their car and drove to Gavin and Autumn's home. When they arrived, Chris parked the car and got out, spotting his son standing behind a sliding glass door on the 3rd floor. However, Chris didn't have an electronic key to enter the building, so Gavin came downstairs to let him in. Chris asked his son to wait with his girlfriend while he went to investigate why Autumn wasn't waking up. Chris entered the apartment, proceeded to the bedroom, and was shocked to see Autumn's pale appearance. Her face and body were bruised, and her nose was bloody. He immediately dialed 911. The police and an ambulance arrived at the address he provided, where the paramedics examined Autumn's body and surveyed the signs of struggle in the bedroom. Given the extent of her injuries and the evidence of a fierce fight, they sadly had no option but to pronounce her dead, concluding that it was no accident. Investigators searched the apartment for clues while a specialist in child interrogation spoke with Gavin, who revealed that an overnight guest had instructed him to go to bed. Gavin recounted hearing his mother's screams, but they abruptly ceased. He provided a description of the man he saw in his room that night, saying he appeared to be a white male of average height with messy hair, resembling someone who had just rolled out of bed. According to Gavin, the man was skinny, but not too skinny. The autopsy concluded that Autumn's death was the result of strangulation. Furthermore, it was discovered that she had been physically assaulted prior to her death, with injuries found in her genital area. Additionally, male DNA samples were recovered from her body. The investigation aimed to address several key questions, including how the perpetrator gained access to the apartment, what motivated the crime, and most crucially, the identity of the individual who had entry to the building, as an electronic key was required for entry. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that the killer was one of the building's residents, since Gavin was familiar with all his neighbors and the man he spotted on the night of the murder was not among them. To commit the crime, the perpetrator would have needed not only an electronic key to access the building, but also a way to enter Autumn's apartment, which presented a problem. There were no signs of forced entry on the door to her apartment, suggesting that either she had let the perpetrator in voluntarily or had failed to lock the door. Eventually, the police abandoned their initial assumptions when they discovered evidence that the perpetrator had accessed the third floor. It emerged that the individual had first climbed up to the second-floor balcony and then made their way to the third floor, where they found the door was already open, allowing them to enter the apartment unimpeded. In addition to the DNA sample, the police also found fingerprints at the scene, which they were working to match to their owner. It wasn't until 12 days after the body was discovered that the police finally released the victim's identity, in the hope that this would lead to new tips from the public. The authorities are seeking anyone with information that could aid the investigation to come forward and contact the detectives. A witness reported seeing a new black SUV, possibly a Honda Pilot, in the parking lot adjacent to the building on the night of the crime. The vehicle was seen in the lot until around 6 a.m. Detectives believe the SUV's owner may have been involved in Autumn's death and hypothesized that the individual used the roof of their car as a stepping stone to climb higher. Specifically, they think the perpetrator exploited the building's decorative protrusions, which resemble steps, to ascend from the second floor to the third. The nighttime crime scene presented an advantage to investigators as most people are asleep then, resulting in fewer mobile phones being active. By analyzing phone activity in Autumn's area, they were able to narrow down the list of active numbers near the crime scene. During the investigation, detectives found that one of the phone numbers belonged to a neighbor of Autumn's, who lived in the same building. Although the neighbor claimed to know nothing about the incident during her police interview, her alibi didn't quite add up. Phone records showed that she had made calls from her apartment and various locations around the city, and her phone was switched off around the time Autumn's life was taken. While it was difficult to pinpoint her exact location due to the margin of error in phone tracking, it was clear that she was being evasive and hiding something from the detectives. So they went to speak with Michelle again. She reiterated that she didn't know anything and hadn't heard anything, but the police subtly warned her that if it was later discovered she had withheld vital information from the investigation, she could be considered an accomplice to the crime. As a result, she began to talk. Michelle said that around 2 a.m. that night, a man known to them as Jay got in touch with her and her boyfriend. Jay was looking to buy illegal drugs and also wanted to hire an escort. The three of them drove to an ATM where Jay withdrew some cash. After that, Michelle and her boyfriend handed over a certain amount of the drug to Jay. Michelle admitted that she and her boyfriend were drug dealers. Later, Jay asked them to sell him more drugs. According to Michelle, she then told Jay to drive to the parking lot near her building. Michelle confessed that she and her boyfriend had planned to rob Jay. Upon arrival at the building, the three individuals ingested illicit drugs. Following this, Michelle and her boyfriend resolved to abscond with the remaining drugs. Prior to their escape, Michelle concealed a bag of the drugs within her genital area. According to Michelle, she and her boyfriend escaped, stealing not just the substance, but also a significant amount of Jay's money. They fled to the building's entrance, then went up to the apartment, where they barricaded themselves inside, sitting silently in the dark. Jay was unable to enter the building since he lacked an electronic key, and he couldn't yell or honk his horn, fearing that someone might alert the police. According to Michelle, when they looked out the window, they noticed shoe marks on the roof of Jay's car. Additionally, a man was seen driving away at approximately 6 a.m. Investigators theorized that Jay must have climbed into the building, attempting to track down those responsible for stealing the substance and money from him. However, as he was unaware of Michelle's residence, it's likely that he inadvertently entered Autumn's apartment by mistake. The police obtained the suspect's phone number and photo from a camera at the bank entrance, where he withdrew cash to buy the substance, and from an ATM camera. Investigators learned that the man's real name was Jitesh Bogle, a 27-year-old Canadian citizen who lived and worked as a car development engineer in Warren, Michigan. He was also the owner of a black Honda Pilot SUV and frequently crossed the river by bridge or tunnel to visit Canada, specifically Windsor, almost daily. Authorities tracked the suspect's movements, discovering he had left Canada on June 10th, the morning Autumn died, and had not returned to the country since. Following the police release of information about the black SUV seen at the victim's house, Jitesh sold his car. Canadian police collaborated with their American counterparts, learning Jitesh planned to relocate from Michigan to Washington State, where his parents resided in Kent. The combination of his decision to move, disposing of the car, and ceasing visits to Canada raised strong suspicions, but the police required concrete evidence to arrest and extradite him to Canada. The Windsor police requested assistance from the U.S. National Security Agency in their investigation and asked them to closely monitor the suspect's activities. DNA evidence found on Autumn's body suggested it belonged to Jitesh, but to confirm this, they needed to obtain a DNA sample from him for comparison. U.S. agents tracked the suspect's every move, aware that he was planning to relocate to Washington State and fearing he might flee to another country. In an effort to alter his appearance, Jitesh shaved his beard and started wearing blue contact lenses. Fortunately for the investigators, Jitesh was reckless. One day, he visited a bar in Warren, where he spent several hours drinking. When he downed his last glass and exited the bar, the agents swiftly seized the glass, thereby obtaining a DNA sample from it. Although it took some time to compare this new sample with the one found on Autumn's body, the outcome was not unexpected. The male DNA discovered on the victim's body was identified as a match to Jitesh Bogle's DNA. On August 17, 2018, nearly 2.5 months following Autumn Taggart's tragic demise, Jitesh was taken into custody at his parents' residence in Kent, Washington, a development that caught him off guard, as he appeared to believe the authorities would be unable to locate him. The U.S. authorities promptly initiated the extradition process to have him returned to his native country. In the supporting extradition documents, the prosecutor underscored Jitesh's perceived threats to public safety, his high risk of fleeing, and his unpredictable nature. Soon after, Canadian authorities charged him with the murder of Autumn Taggart. Due to pandemic-related restrictions, the trial was delayed for an extended period. However, it finally began in November 2021. To maintain social distancing, the proceedings took place in 3 separate courtrooms: the main courtroom, where the judge, prosecutor, jury, and the defendant with his defense team were seated, and 2 additional courtrooms equipped with large screens broadcasting the trial to Autumn's family members and other observers. Jitesh Bogle denied committing first-degree deprivation of life, claiming he unintentionally killed Autumn. He explained that earlier, some thieves stole money and drugs from his car, leaving him upset. After consuming a large amount of alcohol and substances, he got out of the vehicle to search for the thieves. Due to his intoxication, he didn't recall many events from that night. However, he remembered climbing onto the balcony and entering the apartment where Autumn was sleeping, mistakenly thinking she was Michelle, the woman who had robbed him. When Autumn awoke and started screaming, he ordered her to be quiet, but she disobeyed. In response, he covered her mouth, which led to her suffocation. Only after the screaming stopped did Jitesh realize he had accidentally taken Autumn's life, and he attempted to perform CPR on her, but it was too late. Jitesh had no memory of how Autumn's genital injuries occurred or how he left her apartment. His lawyers requested that the first-degree life imprisonment charges be dropped, arguing that the crime was not premeditated. They believed Jitesh was unaware of his actions due to the large quantity of substances he had consumed. The fact that he placed his hand over Autumn's mouth suggests he wanted her to be quiet, not dead. According to defense lawyer Peter Thorning, Jitesh lacked the capacity to form intent or understand the consequences of his actions. Thorning claimed that intoxication was the sole explanation for Jitesh's behavior, and that sometimes tragic events occur without intending the outcome. He stated that Autumn's death was not intentional, and that Jitesh was either too intoxicated to realize his actions could cause death or did not appreciate the consequences. Jitesh's lawyers argued that there was no evidence to suggest the defendant had sexual intercourse with the victim. Although Jitesh's DNA was found on Autumn's body, it was not seminal fluid, according to the lawyers. They suggested that the DNA could have been transferred through cross-contamination, where DNA is accidentally transferred from one surface to another, possibly through the forensic expert's gloves. The defense team attempted to convince the jury that John Lort, a forensic expert involved in the investigation, had botched his job and inadvertently transferred Jitesh's DNA to Autumn Taggart's body. As part of his role, Lort was responsible for photographing the crime scene and collecting evidence that came into direct contact with the victim. Jitesh's defense lawyer, Peter Thorning, questioned Lort about the possibility of DNA or fluid transfer from the body to the bed sheet or vice versa during the manipulation of the body, which is a known phenomenon referred to as cross-contamination. Lort stated during cross-examination that he changed gloves between handling each piece of evidence and using his camera to take photographs, thus preventing cross-contamination. In his examination of evidence in Taggart's room, Lort searched for bodily fluids such as urine, saliva, and semen, as he explained that in cases involving a deceased female victim, the likelihood of sexual assault is higher compared to cases involving a male victim. Lort testified to the court that he did not find any fluid evidence consistent with sexual assault. He acknowledged that his examination of the body was limited as he was not a trained medical professional, such as a coroner. Lort testified that there were no obvious signs of a struggle at Autumn's apartment, such as broken furniture or glass, forced entry, tampered locks, or blood spatter. In contrast, the prosecutor believed that the defendant's actions constituted a search for hidden substances, similar to how Michelle had hidden them in her genital area. The prosecutor argued that the defendant committed sexual assault by searching Autumn's body in the same way, regardless of whether he used his hand. When questioned by the prosecutor about why he didn't call 911 when Autumn stopped breathing, Jitesh disagreed, saying he didn't think it was necessary. Jitesh responded that he feared the police would arrest him because he knew nobody would take his word for it. He could hardly believe his own story, as he recounted in his testimony. Jitesh acknowledged that his memory of the events in Autumn's room was hazy. However, he did recall performing CPR on Autumn after she had stopped screaming. Previously, he had testified that he remembered counting 5 or 6 ribs down before starting CPR, and that he had done 15 compressions accompanied by 3 breaths. The prosecutor also challenged the defendant's claim that the strangulation of the victim was accidental. He pointed out that if the defendant simply wanted to silence Autumn, he could have covered her mouth with his hand. Instead, he also pinched her nose shut, which deliberately prevented her from breathing. Moreover, he sustained this grip for a period of time, indicating that he was fully aware of his actions. Chris Sherwin, Autumn Taggart's former partner and the father of their son, was the last person to hear from her via text message around 12:30 a.m. on June 10th. After sending a follow-up text and receiving no response, he grew concerned. It wasn't until later that day that he received a text from Autumn's phone, only to discover it was their son responding. The court displayed a copy of these text messages for the jury to review on December 1st, 2021. Following deliberation, the 12-person jury found Jitesh Bogle guilty of depriving Autumn of her life. Despite allegations, they found no convincing evidence that Jitesh had engaged in sexual intercourse with Autumn. Autumn's father, John Taggar, expressed relief and gratitude for the verdict, stating, "Can't say we weren't nervous, but it's definitely the right verdict. Autumn deserved this. Her son deserved this. Justice. That's what we wanted. That's what we got." The family members were visibly relieved, hugging each other in celebration. On January 5th, 2022, the court sentenced Jitesh Bogle to life imprisonment, with a minimum of 25 years before he is eligible for parole. Jitesh appeared in court via video from jail, wearing an orange jumpsuit and a black mask. During the victim impact statements, he sat quietly against the wall, distant from the camera. When given the opportunity to speak, he expressed remorse, saying, "It's hard to express the sorrow and remorse I feel. I am happy for the family that they have a sense of justice, and they can move on. Part of my soul died that day as well." Autumn's father, John Taggar, reiterated his desire for Canadian laws to change, stating, "We'd still like to see the laws in Canada change for life sentences to actual life, not 25 years and then parole. We'd like life to mean life for all victims."